Dark clouds shrouded the sky around the great castle that stood in the middle of a wasteland. The man in the cloak moved swiftly through the castle's corridors, sticking to the shadows, carefully observing his surroundings before moving forward. He reached the room where two large statues stood beside the doors leading to the Demon King. However, he didn't intend to enter that way. Instead, he slipped past and stopped by one of the castle's open windows. Looking down, he saw a demon guard on patrol, axe in hand, its body completely encased in armor. But the guard was no match for this stealthy man. He jumped down without a sound, approached, and slit the guard's throat. The demon collapsed, dying instantly, while he sheathed his sword, looking up at the rest of the towering castle. Then he took out a grappling hook and began to climb to the top. He reached a door that seemed to have a magical barrier blocking it, but the man quickly focused energy into his index finger, aiming at the magical barrier, and easily pierced through it, shattering the glass behind it at the same time. He undid the lock, opened the window, and stepped inside, standing high above, looking down on the Demon King's great throne. As he jumped down, the figure on the throne immediately sensed his presence, turning to face him and remarking that the castle had a rather interesting guest at this hour. But how did this man get here? And who was he? A few hours earlier, a group of people were resting and preparing their next plan in the Demon King's hall. They gathered around a map, thinking they could charge straight through the main doors. However, the man in the cloak wanted to take a different route, believing he was more than capable of pulling it off. The others in the group were shocked by this proposal and unanimously objected, saying it was impossible, or believing he would fall to his death. They all laughed at him, before the main girl in the group brought everyone back to attention. She said they would not change the original plan. This was the set battle strategy. Almeria the warrior, Seraphine the high priestess, Lena the mage, and Elvie the holy knight would do their best to draw the Demon King's attention. Meanwhile, Roland would hide in the shadows and use his assassination skills to finish off the enemy. Roland asked Almeria to confirm if she was really okay with him delivering the final blow, as he believed that responsibility belonged to the knight. But Almeria was confident in her plan, as it offered them the highest chance of success. They had been through so much to get here, and she believed they couldn't possibly fail. Roland was silent for a moment before saying he understood. Almeria smiled at his response and said they should take a short rest before proceeding together. Everyone then fell asleep before the battle. Roland also appeared to be sleeping, but he was actually just pretending. Quickly, he turned himself invisible and silently stepped out from their hiding spot. However, Almeria seemed to notice and asked where he was going. The black-haired man gave a small smile, saying he would be gone for a little while, which confused Almeria. That's when Roland explained he was just going to the bathroom and jokingly asked if she wanted to come with him. Almeria blushed, flustered for having asked, and just told him to hurry up and come back. She wondered to herself why Roland was so calm. Regardless, Roland took the opportunity to slip away quietly, but not to go to the bathroom, but to face the Demon King. Now he stood before her as she prepared to attack him. Despite that, Roland was determined to give it his all to kill her. Lightning shot from the Demon King's hand, aiming straight for Roland, destroying everything around them and sending debris flying, but not a single bolt hit him. Roland was no longer where he had been, leaving no trace of where he might have vanished, much to the Demon King's confusion. But then she realized he was standing right behind her. The Demon King immediately spun around, launching another attack, but missed once again. She was starting to get annoyed by Roland's lightning-fast speed. Suddenly a voice rang out, asking when the last time she'd fought in a real battle was, and if she had ever seen skills like these before. Thinking she finally had a handle on the situation, the Demon King summoned a large sword and slashed in a specific direction, creating a massive fissure in the ground that seemed to tear the room apart. However, Roland was still nowhere to be seen. She scoffed, whipping her head around, trying to predict his location. Finally, the Demon King found Roland just inches away, his blade pressed against her forehead. Roland pulled his blade away, causing the Demon King to collapse to the ground, blood streaming from the wound on her head. Her head bowed in defeat. She declared that the Demon King's army would be disbanded, its remnants ordered to retreat and never threaten humanity again. However, Roland suddenly cut her off, saying that wasn't going to happen. He looked down at the Demon King with a cold gaze and asked if she had any last wishes. The Demon King looked up with a faint smile. After their brief exchange, Roland quickly left the castle. Meanwhile, Almeria and the others were on their way to the Demon King's castle, but by the time they arrived, they only found the Demon King collapsed on the ground, apparently dead before they could even join the fight. Roland returned to the city and was congratulated by the king. The king was incredibly impressed that the Demon King the most powerful and cruel being in history, could be defeated so easily. The black-haired man simply replied that it was all thanks to Almeria and the others, as it was through their efforts that they were able to reach the castle. The king was still deeply impressed that Roland could face the Demon King head-on, but Roland just replied that assassins like him were strong in one-on-one fights, and that it was nothing special. He didn't even use any special skills, because Roland believed that the ability to turn invisible and temporarily hide his body from all methods of detection was not unique to him. However, the king had received reports from Almeria and the others, stating that the group's combat abilities and strategies had improved significantly since Roland joined. They also admitted that they stood no chance against the Demon King alone, and said that without Roland, they would have never reached the Demon King's castle. However, Roland remained humble, making the king sigh at his insistence. The old king informed Roland that he could be granted the title of legendary assassin for defeating the Demon King, but Roland didn't want it. He wanted Almeria and the others to receive all the credit for defeating the Demon King, something the king had realized as soon as the mission was assigned. Roland believed that at least Almeria, as the first princess of the Furlan Kingdom, deserved the recognition, as she had truly lived up to her title as a genius, even though the king and her father didn't fully agree with that title. However, the king didn't want Roland to leave empty-handed, and offered to grant him any wish he desired. Roland already knew his wish, but it seemed like an impossible one. His silence led the king to speculate that Roland wanted Almeria for himself, which worried him, and made him try to persuade Roland not to marry her. But Roland quickly reassured the king that he had no intention of marrying his daughter. The mention of Almeria reminded Roland of how she had once told the group that she wished to one day live a normal life, which confused everyone. But Roland had decided that was exactly what he wanted for himself. He no longer wanted to live as an assassin. Instead, he wanted to live in peace, free from deception and lies. Roland just wanted a normal life, without worrying about being betrayed. A simple life was all he wished for, which surprised the king, King Randolph, because the request was so easy. King Randolph still insisted that Roland could wish to be surrounded by women, as having children was one of the things he was most proud of. But Roland told him to stop. The king asked if Roland needed anything else for his new life, but he just said there was nothing, and thanked Randolph. They shook hands before Roland left the room. As he stepped out, a cat was waiting for him, surprising the old king and making him wonder if the castle had stray cats. However, this was no ordinary cat. It walked down the hall, then stopped and scratched at its collar, catching Roland's attention. He knelt down and touched the pendant on the collar, causing it to glow unexpectedly. The cat flew into the air and transformed into a woman. It was Layla, the woman Roland had fought before. She let out a sigh of relief as the experience of being a cat wasn't pleasant, but she brushed it off and continued walking with Roland. Layla, the former Demon King, said she'd overheard Roland's wish and couldn't believe he had such a hard time deciding what he wanted, only to end up choosing such an ordinary wish. Layla's collar had two abilities: transformation and reducing the owner's magical power if it exceeded a safe threshold. After what Roland had done, the existence of a Demon King was no more. He replied with a smile, saying he remembered a certain Demon King who was defeated by some weird guy in less than 10 minutes. But Layla wasn't angry at Roland's words, because in her eyes that weird guy had become a dear man. She said the only reason he let her live was because he couldn't figure out how to use the collar, but she didn't mind if he treated her badly or even sold her off. Layla was grateful that he had removed the collar, calling him sweet, especially for an assassin. Roland chuckled and said he wasn't an assassin anymore, then walked out the door with her. Layla nestled against his arm. She asked where they were going now, and Roland replied that they would go wherever was considered normal. But that answer made Layla complain, saying it sounded boring. Roland warned her that she wouldn't find any more excitement from him. Just then, he took off his cloak, letting it fly into the dark night, as if he had become a new person. Roland recalled their first meeting when Layla had sworn to give everything she had to whoever could defeat her. She had also said he was a worthy companion, but Roland wasn't sure if that was sincere. He was human, so he couldn't fully understand the ways of demons. He asked Layla if she was okay, because her ears were bright red. She just responded with a small squeak and hid under the blanket in embarrassment. Suddenly, a knock on the door interrupted them. A voice called for Roland, and he remembered that he had chosen that name. He hurriedly got dressed. As the woman outside said she was there to collect this week's rent, Roland gave her the money and the girl thanked him. But she couldn't help but ask about the strange sounds coming from his room every day. At all hours, her question was cut off by a meow as a cat walked out of the room, catching her attention. Roland just said that she probably misheard a cat's meow. The girl blushed and apologized profusely, leaving Roland confused by her reaction. Before she corrected herself, saying she wanted to know his occupation, Roland suddenly realized that normal people usually have jobs. He thought that having a job would be helpful since the money he had was about to run out. Although he could ask King Randolph for more, that wasn't the normal life he was looking for. Roland decided to tell the girl he was looking for a job. She asked if he wanted to be an adventurer, but he wasn't interested, saying he didn't think he was healthy enough for that life. The girl agreed since his build seemed rather frail. After a moment of thought, she suggested he work as a staff member at the Adventurers Guild. When he arrived, a girl greeted him, and Roland told her he was there for the job opening, prompting the girl to call for the person in charge. A woman came out and told him to follow her to the back for the interview. Roland followed, telling himself to just do his best. The woman's name was Iris Nagaon, the branch manager of the guild. Roland introduced himself before sitting down to start the interview. However, every question Iris asked was met with a no from him, causing her to sigh and say in frustration that they couldn't just hire any random person. She hated how apathetic and monotonous he sounded, making Roland apologize and wonder how he could convince her he had experience without mentioning his previous job. Iris sighed and said that it didn't matter who he was or where he came from, as long as he was capable. She decided to proceed with the interview by assessing his abilities. Suddenly, things seemed to get easier for Roland as he asked her what she meant by capable. Iris replied that his abilities needed to include being proficient with a sword, having a basic understanding of magic, and possessing some knowledge and ability to appraise items. Even as she said this, Roland secretly flicked his hand toward the window, causing Iris to turn around with a confused look. As Roland proceeded to disappear and quickly approach Iris to remove her panties, and then sit back down without her noticing, Iris turned back and heard Roland say that he was certainly capable of doing what she asked. But she just laughed and told him not to be so cocky, as he also needed to be able to change clothes quickly. Roland held up her panties and asked if this would be sufficient, leaving her confused, until she realized they were hers, causing her to blush furiously. She held down her skirt and asked what kind of magic he had used, but Roland knew he had simply used his concealment skill to its maximum effect. This was the first time he had ever stolen someone's underwear, but Roland considered himself an expert at it. However, he still wondered if what he did was something that should happen during a normal interview. Iris was struggling to find her words, still flustered by what had just happened. Seeing this, Roland decided that perhaps she would feel more comfortable if he returned them to her. And so he did, activating his ability once more to put them back where they belonged. She realized this and grew even more embarrassed. When Roland asked if he was qualified for the job now, Iris grumbled that he had just passed the test. Roland wasn't going to take that for an answer, making Iris grit her teeth, before shouting that she wanted to hire him and they couldn't do it without him. Roland smiled, satisfied with that answer, and quickly left the building, looking up, knowing he would continue striving for the normal life he dreamed of. The next day, Roland got ready, putting on his clothes and glasses for the first job of his new, normal life. Layla, his cat, called out to him, asking what he was going out to do today. Roland replied that he was heading to his normal job. Lila was happy to see him looking so pleased with this job, but he reminded her to behave while he was gone. She promised there wouldn't be any trouble, all while maintaining her cat form. Roland quickly left the building and headed for the guild, where he was greeted by the girl from that afternoon, Melia MacGuffin. She was very impressed that he had passed the interview, especially since he was hired personally by Iris, rather than through the guild's other branches. That meant he was truly skilled at what he did. Melia didn't press the matter further, simply happy that she could finally be someone's handler. She told Roland that before he started, she would give him a tour of the facility. The black-haired man looked around and asked her what adventurers do, which surprised her as she didn't expect such a question. Melia explained that adventurers are tasked with fulfilling requests, from finding materials in deadly dungeons to searching for treasure in exchange for money. However, Roland just summarized it as adventurers being a bunch of rookies who do whatever they're told. The girl reminded him not to say such things inside a guild. Just then, they saw some adventurers returning, with the materials they had been asked to gather. She led Roland to a man named Morley. Morley asked if he had any experience as an adventurer, but Roland replied that he didn't, which made Morley mock him, saying he shouldn't get in the way of a C-rank adventurer like himself. Melia explained that C-rank adventurers make up 10% of all adventurers, meaning they're usually very strong. But Roland seemed disappointed by the arrogance of someone so powerful. Morley's job was to count all the herbs collected for requests that a group of adventurers had completed, and he believed there were enough of everything. However, Roland noticed that other types of herbs were mixed in with the emoji-so leaves needed for the quest. These words angered Morley, and he started screaming in Roland's face, saying that he was a master of botany, and demanded that Roland apologize. But Roland picked up 2 leaves, comparing one with black spots to one without. The leaves with black spots are called cereri and have no detoxification effect, making Morley realize that only half of the herbs qualified for the quest. He was about to hit Roland. He lunged at Roland. Roland simply sidestepped him quickly, causing Morley to tumble to the ground, embarrassing him as he bumped into the door. On his way out, Melia sighed in relief, impressed by Roland's knowledge. But he just said that failing a quest could lead to death. He said some other things that left the girl feeling flustered, until she burst out laughing, because she thought Roland was hilarious with his jokes. Roland just told himself that people here worked differently than what he was used to. The next day, Roland was assigned to clean a corner of the room, while Melia tried to help him. Morley told her she didn't need to help him since Iris would fire him sooner or later anyway. She hesitated to leave as Roland turned back to the mess, almost looking happy with this mundane task, when a voice called out, making Roland realize that Layla had followed him because she was bored. Roland tried to focus on his work until he overheard a few people talking about the ones who defeated the Demon King, and how because of them, the number of subjugation quests might decrease, making things difficult for the trade. Roland wondered if Almeria and the others were busy celebrating their victory at the Kingdom's parade. Layla asked him if he was really okay with that, but Roland insisted that he was fine, which made her call it a waste, because of his perseverance. After a while, Roland finished cleaning everything, impressing Melia with his work speed. She offered Roland a bite of her lunch. During their lunch break, someone appeared walking outside the back door, which caught Roland's attention, prompting him to go check it out. Roland immediately ran into a group of adventurers, furious that their materials hadn't been accepted earlier. He noticed Morley watching from a distance, but Roland didn't want to deal with him, and tried to walk away. This angered the main guy who tried to punch Roland. Roland knew that getting caught using violence against these guys would bring him trouble, which was exactly why Morley was watching from a nearby corner. So Roland decided to just cleverly take the punch, in a way that would break the man's fingers, without him having to do a thing. The man called for another to attack, but Roland didn't want to waste his time. Instead of having a proper lunch and getting back to his normal job, he used his stealth skill to knock out all the men in the area. When the last one, a girl, asked who he was, she knew he wasn't just some ordinary employee. But her train of thought was seemingly interrupted by Roland as he pushed her against the wall and began to charm her. Morley woke up, wondering what had happened, until he peeked around the corner. After hearing certain sounds, only to find Roland and the girl in a passionate act. Morley stared in horror and confusion as to why things had turned out this way. He felt even worse because that girl, Tanya, was someone he had feelings for. But now it was all for nothing. Roland returned from his vacation. Melia had told him that the new employee would work at the front desk first, before being assigned to a more suitable position. She gave Roland a guidebook for him to memorize. But it seemed he had already memorized it all within a few seconds. However, he wasn't going to tell her that. Melia would head to the front desk to assist people, while Roland would observe to learn. A man said he was looking for a quest, and Melia asked him for his identification papers. When he presented the papers, his actions seemed strange and panicked, which Roland noticed. The man went on to request every D-rank quest that needed to be completed within the day. Roland took a closer look at the papers and told Melia they were fake. He explained that there was transformation magic on it, and pointed out the man's strange behavior. The man started to lose his patience, until Melia tried to stand her ground and said he had fake papers. But he still tried to insist that the papers were real. Morley had said it would be fine if she just apologized. She did apologize, but that didn't help either. Roland decided to handle the matter himself, and tried using a fire spell on the papers. It had a barrier spell around it, but that only made the lie more obvious. Roland made the fire stronger, to successfully burn the documents, causing the man to cry out in frustration and admit that it had cost him a lot of money. He realized his mistake when Roland explained that all of his goods would be invalidated, while Roland secretly felt deeply disappointed by the amateurish job on the fake papers, since he himself would have had a smarter way of finding a home beforehand. He had chosen the identity of one of his victims because it was harder to detect when one had genuine papers. Roland told the man it was a good thing he was an adventurer and not an assassin, or else he would have been dead. But even though it sounded cool, everyone was just confused by his words. Melia remembered and said that they needed to contact the knights, at which point the man tried to escape. But Roland was faster and quickly incapacitated him, making it easy for the knights to capture him. Later that day, the girl was surprised by Roland's skills and thanked him, but he said it wasn't necessary, as he only wanted to make sure she wasn't hurt, making her heart race as she looked at him dreamily. Roland knew he needed to try harder to be normal. The next day, Morley tried to ask Melia out for a meal since it was her day off, but she regrettably said she already had plans, causing Morley to sigh in disappointment while Roland was doing his usual cleaning work. The girl came up to him and curiously asked where he lived. He said that he was staying at an inn, but Melia was surprised because normal people usually have a house near their workplace. This made Roland realize that he should have been living in a house all along to have a normal life. But he didn't know, because before, he had never needed to look for a long-term place to live. Roland didn't have a stable place to live before because of his job. Melia wondered if he had been eating properly since he moved here. But Layla just found her actions annoying. Melia found it strange to hear a woman's voice but see no one around. She quickly returned to the main topic, saying she could take Roland house hunting, since she was a local. Roland was a little confused, because he heard Melia tell Morley she was busy the next day. But Layla explained that Melia was just gently turning Morley down, which made Roland think that being a woman seemed tiring. The next day, Roland and Melia met in front of the guild hall. The girl tried to pet Layla, but the cat just ignored her, leaving Melia in shock. She quickly got back to the task of leading Roland to the first house, but Layla didn't seem to like that place. So they kept moving. After looking at many houses, they found one that had been vacant for a long time, owned by an adventurer. However, many people who had lived there before had suddenly disappeared. Although Melia was worried, Roland and Layla were satisfied with this house and prepared to check inside. However, the two of them sensed something strange and asked Melia to stay outside. They stepped inside and found a room with a gloomy atmosphere. Inside was a dark phantom. Layla told Roland to handle it calmly. He focused magic into his hand and punched it, destroying it in just a few seconds. A stone fell to the ground. As Melia came inside, looking worried after hearing a strange noise, Roland changed the subject and said he would take the house. Roland explained that he didn't have any luggage for Melia to help with, but she still wanted to be by his side, and insisted she would cook lunch, running off before he could react. Roland touched his collar, and Layla returned to her true form, saying they should do it. She became shy and said that Melia could come back at any moment. Roland replied that they should make sure to finish before that happened, and Layla leaned in for a kiss, only to realize it was a misunderstanding when Roland told her the places she could clean, while he would clean the rest. This made her push him away, in anger, and storm off, only to trip through the floorboards. Roland sighed. Most of the cleaning was done, and Melia returned with an impressed look on her face, setting down the lunch. Roland introduced Layla to her, but Melia was a bit scared because Layla was a demon. He reassured her that Layla couldn't use magic, which helped her calm down, until she noticed Layla was eating part of the lunch. The three of them ate lunch together, and Melia offered to help clean the rest of the house, which Roland agreed to despite Layla's complaints. The two women cleaned in the same room, where Melia saw Layla struggling, leading her to start teasing the demon woman, which annoyed Layla, who tried to summon one of her allies from the shadows. However, nothing happened, and Melia teased her even more. After all the commotion and cleaning, the house was finally finished and looked much cleaner. Melia decided to invite Roland over for dinner at her place. Since preparing a meal would be too much of a hassle, now Layla didn't want to go, but Roland didn't object to the idea. On the way there, Melia asked about the strange noise from earlier. Roland explained that it was a dark phantom he had defeated, which shocked Melia since it was a B-rank monster. She wondered just how strong Roland was, but he tried to insist that he was normal, though Melia didn't believe him. Eventually, they arrived at Melia's house, and Roland met her family, which made him feel very happy. Roland told Melia's father that life in the city was wonderful, even with all the adventures involved. The older man laughed and said that the life of a normal person was much different, finding a partner, building a family, and raising children. Roland took this to heart, as Melia's father wondered aloud if he received many offers from women, thanks to his nature and appearance. This made Roland smile as he remembered someone after leaving Melia's house and returning to his new home. Layla complained about him being late, but she was interrupted by a kiss from Roland, letting her know that this time they were really going to do it. The next day, Roland went to work and greeted Melia, who suggested he try working at the reception desk for the day. A man named Neil, according to his adventure ID, came to the counter and wanted to take on a D-rank quest, seemingly having avoided them for a long time. Roland looked at the rack and found a quest to exterminate a bird called a killer falcon. Roland wanted a second opinion and asked if this quest was too difficult for D-rank adventurers. Melia didn't see a problem with it, since all the previous D-rank adventurers had requested similar quests. Morley tried to chime in, saying they should just let the adventurers do whatever they want, but the two of them completely ignored him and continued their discussion. In the end, they decided to help the adventurer with his decision. Neil took the quest and left, but Roland felt he couldn't just leave things like that, so he asked Melia to watch the counter for a bit while he went out. Iris saw him leaving and asked where he was going. Roland explained that he was checking on the adventurer who had just taken the quest he was in charge of, but Iris reminded him that she'd heard many rumors about him around the guild, and that she had also just learned about his past. Roland wasn't too concerned about this, as he just wanted to be a normal employee, and started to walk away. But before leaving, he decided to tease the girl by asking if she had checked her underwear today, leaving her flustered and angry. While walking through the city, Roland remembered that Layla had said his glasses change his appearance and aura, so he put them in his pocket and headed to a location in the forest, where Nil might be. Sure enough, Nil was trying to shoot arrows at a large bird, but it easily dodged every arrow and tried to attack him. Roland noticed the situation was very dangerous due to Nil's mistakes, so he decided to approach the archer and started giving him some tips, such as the killer falcon's weak points. The bird's main weakness is when it's targeting its prey, and not just any prey, but something that's moving like a person. The killer falcon is targeting Nil, and Roland suggests that Neil should let the bird charge at him, creating an opportunity for him. Since there was no other way, Roland said that if Neil didn't have the guts to take down a creature like that at his level, he should just give up on being an archer. Neil slapped his own face to fire himself up and said he would try the idea, standing still and waiting for the bird to dive. Despite his fear, Nil remained focused and shot at the charging bird, while Roland smiled and turned away. He returned to the guild with the glasses on his face, seeing Melia's eyes welling up with tears because she was so worried about him. Iris had told her that Roland went into the restroom and didn't come out for a whole hour. Roland reassured her that everything was fine, but Morley tried to butt in to get Melia's attention, and tried to prove he was superior to both of them. But they just ignored him and went back to their work. Roland continued to help adventurers with processing their quests, and it was almost time to get off work when he saw a familiar face walk in, carrying the feathers of a killer falcon, which meant he had completed the quest. Roland praised Neil, and the archer said he realized he still had a lot to learn. He whispered his thanks to Roland for what he had done. But Roland was confused and asked what Neil was thanking him for. Neil just smiled and left the guild. Roland realized that perhaps he should change his hairstyle next time. A new day, a new chance to make a good impression at work. During lunch break, Melia was eating with some other female colleagues when the people at the counter started chatting. One asked Melia about the new guy, and she knew they were talking about Roland. I heard some adventurers have even requested Roland to be in charge of their quests. Another girl at the table said she heard Roland had defeated a grizzly bear and saved another adventurer, which startled the others since a grizzly bear is equivalent to an A-rank monster. Melia quickly confirmed that it was true. The other girls wondered why Melia was there, and she explained that she had arranged the original quest herself. It was just a request to collect some Kuen flower pistols, considered an E-rank quest. However, a lot of time had passed since the quest was assigned, and the guild hadn't received any word from the adventurer. That's why Roland and Melia decided to go out and search for them. The other girls didn't understand why they would send Roland, a newcomer. Melia explained that it was a direct order from the branch manager, Iris, which suggested Roland was no ordinary employee. She also revealed that Roland had brought his cat with him, which made the other girls excitedly gossip about the adorable cat and how it had eaten lots of the cookies Melia made. Although the cat still paid no attention to Melia. As Roland and Melia walked through the forest, Melia became frantic when she couldn't find their location on the map. But Roland seemed to know the way, having memorized every detail of the quest. Even though he'd never been to this area before, he led Melia to their destination without getting lost. However, he claimed he would forget everything by the next morning. Suddenly, Melia mentioned that Roland could throw his voice, but she had no idea he was actually just talking with Layla. When asked about the grizzly bear, Melia revealed that she had been assigned to wait at the entrance, and it only took about half an hour for Roland to return. The other girls were once again amazed that Roland had completed a monster subjugation quest in such a short amount of time. Melia pointed out that it seemed the grizzly had found its cub, and everything was resolved. Before any subjugation took place, a voice echoed throughout the guild building. Melia immediately looked up in recognition, then stepped out into the hallway to see who was calling. She confirmed that there were workers on duty, but explained that they were still on their lunch break. That's when she recognized the tiny boy, the very one Roland had saved before. The boy came to ask for Roland, but Melia told him Roland was out for lunch. However, just as they were talking, the very Roland they were discussing walked in. The boy was overjoyed to see him, thanking Roland for what he did in the cave the other day. Roland patted the boy's head and reminded him to be more careful next time. This scene made the 3 female employees, including Melia, watch with eyes full of admiration and awe. Roland waved goodbye to the boy, surprised to have received thanks even though he hadn't actually defeated anyone. Roland continued with his usual work, and often met with people who came to ask for his help or to entrust him with tasks. Ever since Layla first followed him there, she would always rest under a table to be close to him and watch everything he did. Every day, she saw him acting as an errand boy for everyone as usual, and asked if he found it boring. But Roland replied that it was part of a normal job, which made her sigh irritably as she was starting to get sick of that phrase. Suddenly, Roland heard Melia's voice talking about how something was about to get complicated. He noticed she was talking with 3 other adventurers, then walked over to a nearby shelf with a tired look on her face. She muttered that there was still one person missing, and that she was trying to find something. When Roland got her attention and asked what was wrong, she explained that a party still hadn't gathered enough members for a C-rank subjugation quest. Melia recalled that the area was actually near the village where Roland used to live, and that it seemed more monsters had been appearing there lately. Roland looked closely at the papers as Melia continued to explain that the request might be too dangerous to do alone, which was why it was marked with a party requirement. However, the ones who wanted to take the quest still needed one more person to meet the minimum requirement, and that day was the last day of the recruitment period. Otherwise, the guild branch would have to hand over the recruitment to other branches. Melia beamed at Roland's ability to remember small details, but suddenly a man called out Roland's name. It was Neil, the archer he had helped before. Neil happily called Roland bro and excitedly asked if he could join them on the trip. Roland felt conflicted and hesitant, while Melia agreed that it would be safer for Roland to go with them. However, Roland wasn't sure if an employee could accompany a party on a quest. Melia hesitated for a moment, then suddenly had an idea. She told them both to give her a moment to ask the branch manager, and immediately ran off before Roland had a chance to object. Neil thanked Melia, and right after that, Iris entered the room saying there was no problem with Neil joining, but Roland remained silent, which made Iris tease him, asking if he wasn't confident. He replied that wasn't it, but Iris already knew better, because she knew Roland was capable of defeating a legendary demon all by himself. That same legendary demon was currently yawning under the table. Iris told Roland not to let his staff status stop him from joining missions, and that she had complete faith in his abilities. This surprised everyone in the room, and they couldn't believe it because the branch manager seemed to place immense trust in him. Everyone had so many questions with no answers, but that didn't matter because Roland decided to accept the offer, as it was a direct order from Iris. Melia watched the exchange with a look of frustration and jealousy, thinking that the close relationship between Roland and Iris was a bit suspicious. The group stepped outside and Roland introduced himself. But the other 2 adventurers, not Neil, looked at Roland with contempt and showed their disappointment. They told him not to get in their way. Suddenly, Neil cheerfully told Roland that he was honored to fight alongside him, but Roland told Neil to stop calling him Big Brother, which made Neil decide to call him Master instead, but Roland didn't want to be called that either. Finally, they started moving towards their destination, while Neil and the others began chatting about their past achievements. Roland realized that this group was only temporary for this one mission. He asked them about their ranks and learned that the spear user and Hilo were both C rank, while Neil was D rank. The spear wielder asked Roland what he had ever accomplished, and Roland simply replied that it was all just ordinary stuff, which made the man scoff and move on. After a while, they were approaching the village. Roland said they needed to hurry, confusing the others and angering the healer, as he considered himself the leader of the group. Roland explained that there was smoke rising from the direction of the village, but the others assumed it was just the villagers burning firewood. However, a sudden roar echoed out as a wolf-like creature charged towards them. Roland recognized it and told everyone to stay calm, but inwardly wondered if he should just end it quickly. Before telling himself that wasn't something a normal staff member should do, Roland began to explain that the creature was called a red wolf, with high agility and powerful attacks. The healer believed the best strategy was to let the frontliners approach first, to give the archer an opening to shoot. Unfortunately, the spear wielder didn't want to get anywhere near the wolf, and started to run away as the wolf charged at them. But Roland quickly pulled him back, and smacked him on the back of the neck, saying he'd get himself killed if he kept that up. Roland told him to lower his spear and keep his hips low while maintaining eye contact with the wolf. After a moment of hesitation, the spear wielder finally listened and held his ground. Although his body was trembling with fear, the sight of the spear made the red wolf stop its attack and begin to circle him, remaining wary. Roland called out to Neil to shoot a few arrows at it, blinding it in one eye and incapacitating it. The guy on the front line was told to charge and stab the wolf in the jaw. Finally, the monster was dead, and the spearman fell to the ground in tears, before looking up at Roland and thanking him profusely for what he had done. Both Nil and this guy started calling Roland Big Brother. The healer was still a bit dazed from what had happened, and Roland noticed this, so he went over and asked if he could offer advice when needed, and the spearman immediately agreed. This time they continued their journey, while Roland wondered why a red wolf was here, since its natural habitat was much farther south. But his thoughts were quickly pushed aside when they finally reached the burning village. They rushed into the burning village and started helping to put out the fire as quickly as they could. Roland was throwing a bucket of water on a nearby fire when he heard a voice call out to him. It was the spearman, also holding 2 buckets of water, who told Roland that the fire was caused by a lizard-like monster. Roland knew that a fire caused by a lizard meant the monster was likely a salamander, and he believed the current group wouldn't be able to handle such a creature, so he told them to keep helping the others and put out the flames, while he would handle the monster himself. He started to walk away, leaving the buckets he was holding, before heading towards the forest, and followed the tracks on the ground that led to a specific area. After a while, Roland finally caught up to the salamander, which was startled by the appearance of another person. Turned its head until it saw Roland. It opened its mouth and took a light breath, as a spark formed in its mouth before it unleashed a massive pillar of fire. But Roland simply stood his ground, and sliced right through it with a single swing, the flames instantly vanishing in seconds. The salamander was confused, not understanding why its attack had no effect, so it tried to use its fire breath once more, but it was still unsuccessful. It began to scream in frustration and anger that Roland was still alive, while he explained that all he needed to do to counter the flames was to move at a fast enough speed. As the lizard charged at Roland to attack, he told it that it would be punished for what it did to the village, then proceeded to slice off the salamander's arm, stab the monster in the throat, and slam it to the ground. Roland apologized for fighting like that, and began to drag the salamander's bloody corpse in one direction, while a stranger watched from a distance in silence. This unknown man started to sweat as he saw Roland and wondered who he was. To be able to extinguish a salamander's flame with one hand and kill it in the blink of an eye. The stranger tried to come up with theories about Roland's identity, thinking he might be from the other side, but also wondered why Roland hadn't faced the red wolf directly earlier. Suddenly, Roland looked in the stranger's direction, startling the man, who tried to hide, thinking he'd been spotted. Roland continued to drag the corpse, calming himself down a bit as an idea had sparked in his mind, and he'd decided on something for later. Smoke still lingered around the village, but most of the flames had been extinguished with the help of the villagers and 4 men who were dousing it with water. Roland brought the dead salamander's corpse to the village, and the horrified village chief asked if Roland was the one who had killed it. He introduced himself and said he was part of the group that had come here on a mission. The village chief also introduced himself, and thanked Roland and the others for their help. However, he was about to mention the other monster, the red wolf, when the group told him they had already killed it on their way here. Roland told the village chief that they could now rest easy, and the villagers wanted them to stay the night, while they prepared a feast to thank them for what they had done. Roland walked around the area and looked at the dead bodies, which all seemed to have been killed by the red wolf. As the village chief explained how they lived in constant fear with monsters lurking around, Roland said that the red wolf was a highly intelligent monster. The chief recalled other monsters that had appeared in the village in the past, like orcs, which caused many people to leave. He sighed in frustration about why things had to be this way, when all they wanted was to live a normal life. This made Roland wonder how much suffering he himself had to go through to have such a life. With a determined look on his face, Roland told the village chief not to worry, and assured him that no more monsters would attack the village. As night fell, everyone gathered around the fire, eating and drinking happily together, creating a cozy scene. Roland couldn't help but be moved, remembering the other people he had met so far, like Melia and her family. But he had more to do tonight. Neil and the others could be seen drinking and chatting about the achievements they had accomplished. That day, all thanks to Roland, but when they turned to check on him, he was gone, leaving them confused. Far away in the forest, Roland returned to the spot where he had fought the salamander and called out to the person he had noticed earlier. The man stepped out with a smile, chuckling about how Roland looked so ordinary, yet had the strength and ability to fight the salamander and the red wolf like it was nothing. He introduced himself as an A-rank adventurer and a monster tamer who was looking for strong companions. He explained that he had been using his monsters to attack villages, to lure in adventurers to scout. However, Roland looked displeased hearing this smug man's plans. Roland told the man that he had robbed them of what they had worked so hard for today, but the stranger insisted that the villagers only died because they were too weak. The man started laughing at Roland's words, calling him a nuisance and saying he didn't need him anymore, pulling out a knife and declaring that he could still fight without his monsters. But Roland looked at him with cold eyes and said that he talked too much for a man who was about to die. In just a few seconds, blood poured from the man's mouth. As he fell to the ground, apparently dead, Roland quickly left, seemingly not noticing the strange wolf-like creatures that were approaching the corpse. The next day, everyone said their goodbyes to the four men as they departed. While Roland wondered how Layla was doing, but his thoughts were cut short when Neil confessed that he had been following Roland the day before, but insisted that he hadn't seen or heard anything. He then asked if Roland would take him on as a disciple. Roland immediately refused, much to Neil's surprise. He tried to state his reasons and desires, but Roland just said that all he could teach were the basics. Even so, Neil didn't care. And in the end, Roland didn't exactly say no, but he didn't really agree either and just told Neil to hurry up as they continued on their way. Eventually, they made it back to the guild, where Amelia was excited to see Roland, but was also shocked to hear what the group had been through. She marked the quest as complete and paid everyone, giving Roland a bonus and a day off. However, he was surprised to hear what he'd received, as he had just thought the quest was a simple errand, causing everyone to cry out in surprise. Melia also mentioned that the director wanted to speak with Roland. Upon meeting Iris, Roland told her about the man he met who could tame monsters, and how he had vanished, but Iris said there was nothing they could do. Iris changed the subject, telling Roland she would treat him to dinner at a fancy restaurant as a thank you for his work. But he said he had other things to do, like taking care of a cute cat, and then quickly left, leaving Iris feeling utterly defeated at having lost to a cat. Returning home, Roland was greeted by a disgruntled Layla, who had apparently had a terrible day after being chased by Melia and forced to eat cat food. Roland explained that he had tried to cheer her up by buying the steak and wine she had asked for, but it seemed that wasn't enough, as Layla wanted to know more about what had happened at the village that she didn't already know. Roland didn't hesitate to confess that it was the first time he had killed someone of his own free will, and that he would try to avoid it in the future. Layla realized that Roland's mindset had started to change. Ever since he began his normal life, she placed her hand on his cheek, saying that only a demon king could understand another demon king, and that she seemed to be the only one who could understand him. Roland pulled Layla into a hug, confessing that he felt strange and warm whenever he was with her. She blushed, and admitted she felt the same way, hiding her face in embarrassment. Noticing her ears had turned red, Roland asked if she was okay, but she just sulkily told him to figure it out for himself. While walking through the city with a bag of groceries in hand, Roland passed by an alley. He was about to keep walking but felt that something was off. So he turned back to look inside. Inside, he saw a small, filthy girl covered in bruises and dressed in rags, her head bowed with a gloomy expression. He stood there for a second, before kneeling down to greet the little girl, who weakly lifted her head to look at him, revealing a slave mark on her neck. Seeing the mark, Roland's heart ached. He took a potato from his bag and offered it to the little girl. She weakly reached for the potato and took a bite, and after finishing it, she leaned back against the wall. Roland knew the little girl wouldn't survive without his help, so he decided to take her home. When he got home, Layla greeted him in her apron, happily announcing that today's sauce was the best she'd ever made. She looked into his grocery bag to check if he'd forgotten the bread, since she needed it for dinner. It was then that Layla finally noticed the little girl on Roland's back. and asked him about her. As Roland came inside, he explained that he'd be taking care of the girl for a while. Layla wondered why he would even bother since no one asked him to. Roland said it was no problem, as they had a spare room. Layla agreed, telling him to do as he pleased, and announced that the bath was ready, though she couldn't help him since she was busy preparing dinner. After her bath, the little girl had fallen fast asleep, probably because she felt comfortable. Roland asked Layla if there was a way to remove the slave mark. Layla said there was, but she couldn't do anything about it since she could no longer use magic. Noticing Roland staring intently at the little girl, Layla teased him about his kindness despite him being a former assassin. Getting back on topic, Layla explained that a slave mark is a contract that can only be removed by the one who placed it. Roland already knew this and said that was only true according to human knowledge. Layla looked closely at the little girl and wondered why someone would make her a slave since she didn't look valuable enough to sell. Roland agreed, as Layla explained that humans often use different kinds of slave contracts. She mentioned the little girl's contract, called a demon contract, which trades one's soul for extraordinary magical power. However, it comes with the trade-off of submission and the inability to lie. Layla said she could teach Roland how to cast the spell, but if he didn't learn it properly, it wouldn't work, and there was a chance of failure. Even so, Roland was determined to learn it. Layla got a little smug, saying he should be grateful that a demon like her was teaching him personally, but Roland quickly put her in her place and told her to get on with it. After some time teaching, Roland felt he had a chance to break the seal. He approached the little girl, but before Layla could remind him of something important, Roland gently cast the spell, succeeding on his first try and breaking the slave mark. The slave mark on the little girl's neck vanished in an instant. Layla stood there, stunned that Roland had succeeded in casting a 5th-rank spell in a single try without a magic circle, making his magical power equivalent to hers. Roland wondered about 5th-rank magic, and Layla explained that there's a ranking system for demons with higher ranks possessing greater magical power. She also revealed that she is a 1st-rank demon, and asserted that Roland has a talent for magic. Although he felt he hadn't done anything special, Roland remained humble. But Layla wanted him to understand that his magic was on par with other demons. When dinner time came, the little girl finally woke up and was startled to see Roland in the room. He introduced himself and gave her a bowl of soup that Layla had made, saying he couldn't guarantee how it tasted, but it was better than nothing. Layla walked in with an angry look on her face, offended by what he'd said. The little girl started eating the soup, but still didn't say a word, which made Roland think. He leaned closer to Layla, which made her mistakenly think he was about to show affection to her in front of the young girl, causing her to blush, though she didn't resist. In reality, it was just a misunderstanding, as Roland placed a hand on her neck and turned her into a cat. Layla cried out in confusion and anger, but the little girl was delighted by the sight. Roland picked up the cat and told the little girl to take care of it, while the cat loudly complained about the situation and demanded Roland turn her back into a human. The little girl asked if taking care of the cat was an order from her master, but Roland insisted that he wasn't her master and wasn't forcing her. He told them both that he was heading to work, and if she needed anything, she could ask the cat. Roland went to the guild for work and looked through the member list, realizing that the race, gender, and age of all the adventurers weren't registered. Melia noticed and asked him what he was doing, and he explained that he just wanted to confirm something, but a meow from outside distracted them. Roland opened the window and asked the little girl what she was doing there before letting her into the guild. Everyone stared and whispered about how reliable Roland was for taking care of the little girl. He apologized for the girl showing up, but Melia said it was fine and that they could just get permission from the branch manager. However, Morley walked in and said that wasn't going to happen because this place wasn't a daycare. Roland thought that made sense. Morley started complaining about how much he hated kids because they were noisy and annoying. Just then, Iris entered the room, having heard the commotion and learned about the situation. She immediately gave Roland permission to keep the girl with him, as long as she didn't cause any trouble. Flustered and annoyed, Morley asked Iris if it was really okay to give Roland so much freedom, trying to complain that he was always the first one to go home and didn't take his job seriously. Iris replied that it was only because he always finished his work, which earned him the right to leave early. So Iris just told Roland to keep the little girl in the reception office, and he told the girl to be good, saying he would come back to check on her often. The little girl beamed as Roland patted her head. When work was over, the little girl was brought back to Roland and Layla's house. They had named her Mei Li, an ancient demon word meaning blue sky, because she couldn't remember her own name. The little girl seemed very happy with the name and jumped for joy as Layla asked Roland what he planned to do with her. Roland replied that he would turn her into an adventurer and also wanted to find someone to teach her how to live a normal life. Layla was about to make a suggestion when Roland thought to himself that he could ask Melia for help, which made Layla storm off in anger. Later, Roland would tell Melia about the training sessions they would have every day until morning. But the first session was just running. The little girl seemed to have trouble with this. She would get tired quickly, but over time, Melia would learn to build her stamina and get used to it. Roland asked the little girl if she remembered her time as a slave, but Melia still didn't remember a single thing about her past. Layla called them in for dinner. However, she wasn't happy at all. She stared at Roland and said that she wasn't his maid. He reassured her that he had never thought of her that way. Layla admitted that she just wanted more of Roland's attention, since he seemed to be focused only on the little girl. Roland didn't understand what she meant and asked if she wanted him to train her, which made her groan. Night came and everyone seemed to be fast asleep. With only Roland awake, he quickly noticed a strange presence outside the house, so he went out to check. He was confused about who the assassin's target was, since very few people knew Layla's identity. This could only mean one thing. The assassin was there for the little girl. As time went by, Roland continued to train Melia. The little girl held a tree branch and tried to attack the black-haired man, but Roland easily dodged every blow. Even though none of her attacks landed, he still praised her and said she was doing great. She just needed to gain more practical experience. Melia asked if the moves had names, and Roland said they didn't need any, but she could name them herself if she wanted. Layla announced that it was time for lunch, giving Melia an opportunity to attack, as she shouted out one of her moves. But the very fact that she yelled made it easy for Roland to block her attack, causing the little girl to pout and throw the branch away in frustration. She ran to Layla for comfort, but Layla sided with Roland, saying that this wasn't a game, and that Roland wouldn't lose to some kid, which made Melia even angrier. A few days had passed since the assassin incident, and things had been quiet. But Roland didn't think it would end that simply. During a meal, Layla asked Roland why he was teaching Melia assassination techniques instead of swordsmanship or martial arts. If he wanted her to become an adventurer, Roland admitted that he didn't want her to have the naive mindset of many other adventurers who think they can afford to fail because there will always be a next time. Layla praised the little girl for improving so much, compared to the last time she saw her train, and Melia said it was all thanks to Roland's help and advice. Layla pondered and asked if the little girl was finally ready to become an adventurer. Roland asked Melia if she wanted to become an adventurer, and the little girl answered immediately without any hesitation. They arrived at the guild hall, and Melia, seeing them, wondered why he was there on his day off. Roland explained that he was there to register Melia as an adventurer, even though she was still young. Melia went to get the application form for the little girl to fill out before explaining that the test would consist of a magical power measurement and a practical exam. The practical exam would come first, and unfortunately, it was being supervised by Morley, much to everyone's disappointment for various reasons. It wasn't that they thought Melia would lose, but just that she had to deal with Morley. They walked over to the combat area, where Morley confidently declared that his job was to teach children to give up on their foolish dreams. But everyone was already prepared to laugh at him. Roland handed Melia a sheathed knife and told her to do just as they had practiced. Melia and Morley stood facing each other, preparing for the match. Melia started the test, and Morley immediately rushed forward, unleashing a powerful strike with his wooden sword. Morley declared that the first to strike wins, but Melia easily dodged it and repeatedly struck Morley on the back multiple times. Eventually, Morley had to beg her to stop, which meant she had passed the combat test, although she still had room to grow, especially with her magic. Being so young, she still passed the adventure exam with flying colors. The three of them decided to have a party to celebrate. Back home, Layla helped Melia get dressed up, and the act seemed to make Melia remember something, but she decided to put it aside for now. Melia ran into the guild, eagerly asking Roland to give her a quest, but he had to explain that F-rank adventurers don't get combat quests, so she could only take on easier jobs. Suddenly, night stormed in, demanding to take her away, but Layla and Roland refused. The knights decided to use force, and Roland sighed before knocking one of them out with a punch straight to the face, sending him crashing to the ground, which made everyone in the guild look at him with complete admiration. Unexpectedly, Baladel, the leader of the knights, walked in and demanded the girl, calling her by a nickname. Layla refused, and Baladel took notice of her beauty, trying to invite Layla to come with him. But she slapped him right across the face. Layla declared that only Roland had the right to touch her. Baladel didn't recognize Roland until he took off his glasses. Roland asked about the situation with Baladel's older brother, saying that if the man returned, Roland would forgive him and wouldn't reveal the dirty tricks he used to seize the throne. Baladel suddenly became cooperative, apologizing for what he and his knights had done. Roland accepted this with satisfaction, but still wanted the old man to reveal everything he knew about the little girl, after learning about her past. In the end, Roland allowed Baladel to leave, since it wasn't normal to interrogate the nobility. He said goodbye to Baladel. That evening, Roland returned to the guild, with everyone's eyes fixed on him, wondering who he was to make a lord kneel. Roland told Mei Li that everything would be okay, which made her remember something else, but she quickly dismissed it. She said she would take the quest he had chosen. When night came, once Mei Li was asleep, Roland quickly told Layla that Mei Li was actually a princess from the fallen kingdom of Badenhark, and seemed to have lost her memory. Layla wasn't happy to hear this, and Roland opened his arms to hug her. Layla asked if anyone was waiting for Mei Li, but Roland didn't know either, and said he might have to leave later to ask King Randolph about it. Mei Li lay in bed, wondering when her memories had returned, recalling all the moments she had interacted with Roland, Layla, and many other things after being enslaved. She remembered a large mansion that was once her home, where she had kind parents and 3 siblings. However, something happened and it was all taken away from her. After that, Mei Li didn't understand anything else. Everything went dark until she met Roland in the alley. Back in the present, Mei Li got out of bed and went to Roland and Layla's bedroom, asking if she could sleep there tonight. Mei Li got into bed and hugged Roland tightly until Layla poked her head out from under the covers with an annoyed look, because Mei Li's arrival had ruined her plans with Roland. Now she wouldn't have another chance before he left for a while. Mei Li noticed that Layla hadn't gotten dressed yet. She asked if Layla felt cold, and Layla said she was fine because she was under the blanket, and told the little girl to get in between them so Roland would have a place to sleep. The little girl asked Roland where he was going, and he said he would be on a business trip for 2 days, and that Mei Li would be staying with Layla. Hearing this, the sad little girl clung to Roland. Layla joined in, hugging them both, and they fell asleep in a warm embrace. The next morning, Mei Li told Layla she was going to the Adventurers Guild and would be back when she was finished. Layla continued with her housework and wondered what Roland was up to. In fact, Roland was in King Randolph's bedchamber at that very moment, trying to wake the king up by gently tapping him. This caused the king to jolt awake, startled, but Roland reassured him that there was no danger. Then, Roland explained that he had a favor to ask regarding the princess of the Badenhark kingdom. Roland wanted to know if there were any survivors from that kingdom, and King Randolph revealed that Mei Li's mother was still alive, but there was no official information about the rest of her family. With this information, Roland asked the king to inform Mei Li's mother of the situation, then quickly returned home. When Roland got home, Mei Li still hadn't returned from the Adventurers Guild. Layla told Roland how everyone was talking about the little girl. Many people had commented on Mei Li, saying she was a promising new adventurer. The conversation was cut short when Roland announced that Mei Li's mother was alive and would be coming for her in 2 days, which made Layla look away with a sad smile. Roland noticed the change and watched her in silence, while Layla tried to sound optimistic, saying she couldn't be sad that Mei Li would be reunited with her family. They were determined to make the next 2 days the best days Mei Li had ever had, creating plenty of memories before the day of their parting arrived. Layla helped Mei Li get ready, and when the carriage arrived, the 3 of them held hands as they went out to meet Mei Li's mother, or rather Alias's mother. All the memories came flooding back to the little girl, as mother and daughter embraced in tears. Mei Li's mother thanked Roland and Layla for taking care of her, promising that she would forever be in their debt. She reminded her daughter to take a moment to say goodbye to them, and Mei Li stepped forward to tell Roland and Layla that she was so happy to have met them and had learned so much from them. Layla comforted Mei Li, telling her this wasn't a final goodbye. The little girl promised she would always come back to visit them and would write them a letter, but she also reminded him that one day she would become Roland's wife. Roland simply replied that he understood, which left Layla feeling flustered and jealous of his response. The little girl gave one last tearful smile, saying she was very happy to have met them. Before leaving with her mother, Roland and Layla felt the same way. After that, Roland went to see King Randolph again, and just like before, he slapped him across the face to wake him up. The king shot up with a yelp, his eyes wide as he stared at the black-haired man, wondering why Roland was still visiting and if he was actually planning to kill him. Roland quickly corrected his assumption, saying he'd come to thank Randolph for the other day and to repay his debt. The king tried to refuse, saying it wasn't necessary since Roland had already helped him so much back when he was an assassin. But Roland insisted on repaying the debt, saying it had nothing to do with his past. He owed the king a favor as an ordinary man. Randolph thought for a moment, then suddenly had an idea for how Roland could make it up to him. One that involved his daughter, the first princess and a hero in her own right, Almeria. Roland wondered if something was wrong with her. And there was, because after defeating and conquering the Demon King, she'd been feeling down. Her personal slave had asked what was the matter. She realized Almeria was sad because the person she loved had suddenly disappeared, even though they had promised to be together after the conquest. Roland nodded, seeming to understand the situation, and asked if he just needed to find that person. But Randolph was annoyed by Roland's denseness, telling him that Almeria was talking about him, and told him to go cheer her up. Roland returned to the city, wondering what to do, because despite what he'd been told, he knew he hadn't made any promises to Almeria. Besides, dating royalty wasn't something an ordinary person did. When he got home, he explained the whole situation to Layla, who remembered Almeria, and called Roland a troublemaker for the situations he got himself into. But Roland didn't remember promising the girl anything, despite what had apparently happened from Almeria's perspective. It seemed Roland had just vanished, and she'd been sad about it ever since. Layla seemed to come up with an idea to solve this and suggested that Roland could make Almeria think he was dead. Because if it's sadness for someone who has passed away, time will heal that wound, rather than the endless suffering over someone who's just missing. Roland's eyes widened, thinking it was a brilliant idea. He asked Layla if she had a plan, and she told him about a level 7 illusion magic called Real Nightmare. Roland's curiosity was piqued as he stood up from his chair. She asked if he wanted to learn it, and he immediately said yes, while Layla began teaching him the spell. As expected, Roland learned it incredibly fast, which made Layla a little unhappy, as it hurt her pride as a demon lord. While she was distracted, Roland raised his hand and held it near Layla's face, testing out the Real Nightmare spell, making her believe she was a dog and he was her master. Suddenly, Layla became a completely different person, pouncing at Roland, barking happily as she tried to tackle him. But he quickly dodged, which only made her annoyed and pouty. He realized it wasn't just an illusion, but was combined with hypnosis. But Roland's thoughts were cut short, as Layla started kissing and licking his face like a dog while barking. Roland figured it was probably time to bring her back to reality. With a simple clap of his hands, he snapped her out of the trance and she realized what she'd been doing, her face flushing red as she started complaining about what he'd done to her. Roland turned to head to the palace again, saying there was no time for idle chatter, which only made Layla feel offended, as she thought he was dismissing her words as not worth listening to. But Roland just kissed her to shut down that annoyance, then told her he'd reward her if she behaved while he was gone. She replied not to take too long before he left the house. It was another normal day at Roland's job, with many adventurers flooding the guild, requesting quests and creating a lot of work for the staff. Layla was there in her cat form, batting at papers, while Melia approached Roland and handed him some documents to handle. He took them without hesitation, starting to go over the papers. The girl leaned in closer to get a better look at Roland. Before remarking that he'd seemed a bit off lately, she asked if it was because Meili had gone home, which made both Roland's and Layla's eyes widen in shock. He thought for a long time and didn't know how to explain it, only saying that there was a strange feeling, like an empty space in his heart. Melia said that feeling was called loneliness. The girl smiled and told Roland it was cute that he cared about his relatives, then told him to get back to his paperwork. However, as she started to turn away, someone suddenly burst through the guild's doors, leaving Melia confused and wondering who it could be. The doors were thrown open with a bang, and a person confidently strode into the building. Roland's head snapped around and his eyes widened, as he saw a familiar face standing in the middle of the guild, wearing a look of determination and satisfaction. Almeria, dressed in her familiar armor, apologized for the commotion, while everyone in the building was surprised and excited to see the hero princess in their hall. Melia, on the other hand, was just confused about her identity, thinking she was just another adventurer. Almeria approached the reception desk and told Melia she was at the guild because she'd heard an employee named Roland worked there. But Melia was struggling to answer her, while Roland himself was hiding his face with papers, trying not to be seen. Unfortunately, Almeria moved closer to get a better look and recognized Roland, even though he tried to claim she had the wrong person. But she easily saw through his disguise, which was just a pair of glasses. Roland was silent for a moment, still holding the paper over his mouth, before asking Almeria what she wanted. She replied that she came to become an adventurer. He immediately told her they weren't accepting any more applications, leaving Almeria confused and annoyed, as she thought everyone should have a chance to become an adventurer. She turned to Melia for help, which only made the poor girl even more bewildered. Meanwhile, Roland wondered why Almeria was at the guild, thinking that perhaps the spell had failed. When Roland had gone to the palace, Almeria was crying on her bed, her face buried in her pillows and blankets, sobbing. She heard a sound and turned, asking who was there. Until she saw Roland walking through the sheer curtains of her bedroom window. Her tears stopped for a moment as she stared in confusion and shock, recognizing him. As the black-haired young man approached, he used the real nightmare spell on her. He told her that he had died after the battle with the Demon King, bleeding out from a wound on the way back. Roland took a step back to see the spell's effect, and saw the girl start to cry again, confused, not knowing if she was speaking to him or to herself. Almeria said that she loved him and that he had promised to stay by her side, to kiss her after the battle was over, repeating over and over that he had promised her. Roland seemed to recall that he had promised something like that, and deciding to keep his promise, he stepped forward and gave Almeria a sweet, brief kiss, before he quickly left, praying for her well-being. And yet, it seemed that wasn't the last time he would see her. Roland wondered if someone had removed the spell and frowned at the situation, while Almeria pleaded with Melia to hurry up and give her an application to become an adventurer. But Roland refused, telling her she was already a princess and a hero, and that this was no time to be playing around. The girl pouted and said it didn't matter, questioning his attitude after what he'd done to her. All the other staff members were confused, whispering among themselves about Almeria and Roland's relationship, wondering who Roland really was. Almeria's expression turned cheerful, wondering if Roland was embarrassed, but Roland tried to insist he didn't know what she was talking about, and asked if she had told her father about this visit. This only made the girl more annoyed, as she didn't want to bring her father into this. Everyone in the guild started to wonder if the two of them were actually together. Almeria muttered a complaint that she should be allowed to become an adventurer, also wondering why Roland was wearing glasses. Then she became shy, saying that the glasses looked really good on him. She demanded that he ask his superior to make her an adventurer, but he refused. However, another staff member came over and said it would probably be best to listen to her, otherwise their heads might be in trouble. With some hesitation, Roland agreed and went with Almeria to see the branch manager, Iris. Almeria confidently told the woman that she wanted to become an adventurer and asked if that would be possible. Iris said that would be fine and was about to say something else when Almeria cut her off. The girl asked for Iris's name and said she would remember it, but Roland jumped into the conversation with a sharp glare, telling her to stop talking to his boss like that. With a haughty look, Almeria apologized, then seemed shy as she introduced herself to Iris. She informed Roland that his boss had agreed, making Roland sigh and say that Almeria would have to go through a test of her abilities, and that he would be the one to evaluate her. This meant she would have to fight him. Almeria said that was impossible, and that there was no way she could win against Roland. However, she still didn't want to find another guild to join. Roland asked why she was so determined to join this specific guild, until she admitted it was all just an excuse to see him. Finally, they went out into the city streets and prepared for their match. As Almeria and Roland faced each other, the girl raised her blade and declared she would fight seriously to make him acknowledge her. Roland told her to give it her all and wondered if she was even capable of standing before him. He began to stare her down, releasing a heavy aura, which Almeria immediately sensed. She suddenly jumped back, holding her sword in a defensive stance, while Layla observed, thinking that she had a good sense for danger. Unfortunately, the pressure from Roland's killing intent alone was enough to paralyze her. Almeria broke out in a sweat, continuously backing away from the advancing man. As Roland's stare intensified, the girl dropped to her knees in fear, which meant the match was over. She panted in disbelief at how she could have thought she'd gotten stronger. Disappointed that she could only withstand his killing intent for 5 seconds, Roland praised her, saying he really did think she'd gotten stronger. Roland mentioned that back then she would have fainted every time she was hit with his killing intent, and she even wet herself each time, embarrassing Almeria, who tried to insist it was just sweat. Regardless, Roland declared it his victory and said she didn't qualify. causing Almeria to groan in frustration and complain to him before running off, saying that she would be back. She left with a bright smile on her face as she rode away on her horse while the surrounding crowd buzzed and went on with the rest of their day. Roland apologized for all the trouble, and Melia asked about his relationship with the princess. He answered honestly that they had journeyed together to defeat the Demon King. The girl just took it as a joke and laughed, before Roland decided to say he was just Almeria's tutor, which seemed to make sense to Melia, and also explained why he wore glasses. She left looking confident, while all the other staff members also believed his story, making Roland realize he'd just gained a strange title. It was another normal day for Roland at his job. A staff member came up to him, saying he could take over the reception desk, since he was so good at handling people's disputes. Roland called for the next person to come to the counter, and a young boy stepped forward, timidly asking about a quest. He asked to confirm Roland's identity, saying he wanted to be sure because Nail and the other adventurers had spoken well of Roland, and that any quest Roland recommended would never run into trouble. But Roland said he shouldn't believe everything he hears. The boy asked Roland for a quest that suited his abilities, and Roland went to get one, a simple E-rank quest for the adventurer. He looked at the quest and believed he could handle it, but he couldn't help but worry, because he couldn't stand the thought of getting hurt. Roland reassured him, and said that it was normal to worry about such things. Eventually, a girl walked up to the counter and asked for a difficult quest. Roland found a quest that had 2 E-rank adventurers already registered and needed one more person to meet the requirements. He brought the quest to the girl, and she accepted it without hesitation. Roland went to process it and gather the remaining members of the team. By the afternoon, the group had assembled with adventurers named Atro, a spear user, Uno, a sword user, and the girl from before, Everly. They all looked at each other with worried expressions, and told Roland they didn't believe they were actually strong enough to complete the mission. Hearing this, Roland told them they should go somewhere else, and left the reception desk to Melia for a while. While everyone was outside, he explained that he was going to train the group a bit, since they had all signed up for quests that were too difficult for them. They all got angry and felt insulted, trying to say they could manage if they worked together. But Roland responded by summoning small shadow entities that proceeded to defeat the 2 men and take the girl's underwear. Roland laughed at them and called them insects, saying they were weaker than the shadows he summoned, which were already weak. The girl said her skirt had been flipped, and Roland said she should be thankful that's all that happened, as women often go through worse when facing bad people. They needed to determine what they could and could not do, and Roland demanded they say they were weaker than insects, because that would keep them humble and help them gain self-awareness, which would turn into strength. From now on, they would begin training by fighting the shadows. Each member would gradually learn tricks suited to their abilities, while learning to fight against the shadows and become stronger, before preparing for the mission they had signed up for. They seemed like different people. When the man who had proposed the quest asked the group to help him, and they confidently said they would do their best. Back at the guild, Roland returned to the reception desk and saw someone begging the staff for another chance, as he really wanted to become an adventurer. The staff told him to leave because the guild was about to close, and he apologized and did so. Melia explained to Roland that the boy had been asking about this since the day before. However, there was a rule to wait 6 months before reapplying. She also said the boy's skill was strange, and it seemed he didn't know how to use it. But she wanted to change the subject and asked if Roland was free for the day. Unfortunately, he turned her down because he said he still had a lot to do, and that involved going outside the guild and checking on the boy's situation. He explained that the boy needed to become an adventurer because he wanted to help his mother, but he said he wasn't strong enough, even though it was his dream. After seeing Almeria fight, Roland asked the boy to show him his skills, and he demonstrated a skill called Penetrate, which used his sword to extend his attacks further than normal. Roland thought for a moment, before suggesting the boy use the same skill but with a shovel. When he did so, he felt embarrassed, because his skill was only useful for things like digging. However, Roland explained that it was very important and useful, as it would help create safe zones, restoring the boy's confidence. When Roland told him he could take the test, at another guild, Roland initially planned to teach the boy how to handle a spear, but seeing him run off happily made Roland realize that was enough for now. Afterward, another adventurer came over and rudely sat on the desk, demanding a good quest. When Roland suggested he could gather herbs or carry luggage, the man got angry and started yelling at Roland. Suddenly, Neil walked in and slapped the man, telling him not to bother Roland or sit on the desk. Neil apologized to Roland for the man's behavior, until the man realized that Roland was the person Neil was always talking about, and immediately switched to idolizing Roland, but that only made Neil even angrier, and he tried to discipline the man, making the man bow his head again. Neil then asked Roland to tell them about the quest, while our heroes sighed at how troublesome the situation had become. Roland continued to help adventurers at the counter, earning him praise from Milia, but Morley jumped in, saying it was no big deal. Milia tried to argue that it was a big deal, since Roland had been working for less time, but was still an excellent employee. Morley tried to claim he was more popular, but Milia knew he was only popular with people he was close to, causing them both to glare at each other and tell each other to just get back to work. Another staff member told Roland to take a break. He left and was on his way out when he ran into a shadowy figure, who told him that everything was fine with the group he had trained. Iris approached, wanting to know what had happened with Almeria and Baladel. Roland honestly explained everything, which disappointed Iris because she couldn't scold him. She called him an ally of justice, and then told him one last thing before he left, that a group of adventurers had just gotten stronger. He just said that he'd given them advice to avoid a disaster. Iris hummed thoughtfully before telling him that he was helping nobodies become excellent adventurers. Iris tried to invite Roland to dinner again, but he quickly refused, saying he had a cat to take care of. Iris insisted it was about work. He replied that work could be discussed at the office. But before he could leave, she called out that she had an offer for him to become a full-time examiner for the adventurer exam, which piqued his interest. Roland was taking his usual walk through the city in his work uniform when he happened to run into Milia, who caught his eye and ran over. She was panting, trying to catch her breath because he walked so fast, but he was only focused on what she had come for. Milia looked up with a radiant smile and held up a bag, pulling out a carefully wrapped bottle, saying she wanted to celebrate his promotion to full-time examiner. Roland was about to say he was busy, but Milia said that when happy events happen, people should celebrate because that's what's normal. The black-haired man was taken by surprise and immediately agreed to Milia's suggestion, causing her to jump for joy. However, she grew a little worried when she realized Roland would do anything if she told him it was normal. The two walked through the city, chatting together. Milia said that all the staff were surprised to hear the news, since Roland had only been working at the guild for 2 months. She was excited to see him become the guild's first full-time examiner, especially since everyone agreed, for the most part. Roland remembered one person who definitely didn't agree, but Milia told him not to count that person, as it would be strange to oppose the decision after seeing the branch manager's report on him. Milia was also moved by Roland's concern for the young boy from before, and she had sensed a change in the adventurer's attitudes towards recent quests. Neil had also changed a lot, and despite having been an E rank for a long time, he quickly rose to C rank. Roland tried to claim that the adventurer's changes were their own efforts and had nothing to do with him. But Milia said that Iris had said otherwise, and that Roland's sincerity had touched everyone's hearts. This made him stare blankly as Milia tried to convince him that there was something special about him. He asked her why she was so happy, as if she were the one being rewarded. She laughed and said that was exactly it. Since she was his superior, his praise meant she also got some of the credit. As they continued walking, Roland asked Milia about everyone else when she mentioned the celebration. Milia explained that the branch manager would be coming too, and that they would be celebrating at her place. Without a doubt, Roland thought it was normal to celebrate at the home of the person being honored. When they arrived in front of the house, they both saw Iris standing outside awkwardly in a fancy dress, holding a wrapped bottle of wine, leaning and waiting impatiently. She greeted them before handing the bottle to Roland, but Milia was more focused on why Iris was so beautifully made up. Iris insisted it was normal for her, which Roland believed, though Milia knew she was trying her best. Hearing the commotion, Layla came outside to see what was happening and cheerfully greeted Roland, saying it was rare to see him come home with guests. Milia greeted her back, and Iris introduced herself as the guild's branch manager. But Layla already knew who she was, which left Iris flustered. Layla turned to Roland and casually asked if the two women were there to have some fun with him, causing Iris and Milia to jump in shock and embarrassment. Roland immediately denied it and set down the wrapped bottles. Seeing the bottles, Layla realized they were having a party and smiled confidently. Milia quickly asked to borrow the kitchen and an apron, which surprised Iris, who asked if Milia intended to enter her castle, teasing her about her bravery. Milia sighed and asked Layla to show her what she could and couldn't use, then went with Layla to the kitchen while Iris watched, remarking that the two seemed to get along well. Meanwhile, Roland and Iris started setting the table. waiting for the food. Milia lifted the pot lid with a look of surprise and asked the demon girl what she was cooking, then took a taste. Milia sighed in frustration because the dish was too delicious, but still tried to say that something was off and needed improvement, causing the two women to start arguing. Milia tried to push Layla away and told her to move aside for a bit. Layla pouted angrily, but then caught sight of Roland and Iris and went over to hug Roland's arm, introducing herself to the branch manager. Everyone decided to start the party early since it would take some time for Milia to prepare the food. The three of them sat down together at the table. Iris asked Layla about her relationship with Roland, as she was very curious after hearing they had met during their journey. Layla casually replied that she was like Roland's partner, which stunned Iris. Layla told Iris there was no need to panic, as she understood that women often seek out strong men. And as long as Roland returned to her side in the end, she would be satisfied. Roland asked if she had had too much to drink, causing Layla to laugh sheepishly. Iris thought about it and finally understood why Roland had turned down her dinner invitation. Milia finally finished preparing dinner and asked Layla what she had been bragging about in her absence. Layla replied that Milia just needed to bow down to her. Milia complained once again, turning to Roland, trying to convince him that her food was better, and he should choose her instead of Layla. After being rejected again, Milia growled and started chugging a drink she brought. Layla told her that it just wasn't her day. Everyone joined in the celebratory feast, eating delicious food and having drinks, which left Milia and Layla full and fast asleep on the bed, leaving Roland and Iris as the only two still awake. Iris asked Roland if he could still go on, but he didn't answer the question, simply moving closer to her and placing his hand over her drink. They looked at each other in silence. Nobody said anything, before Iris finally leaned in for a kiss. She quickly pulled back when she realized Roland didn't resist and called him a bad boy. Roland didn't object, as he had done wrong things in the past. Iris asked if he was good at capturing women's hearts, and Roland confirmed that he could be if he needed to. Iris began to crawl on top of Roland. The next day, after everyone had left, Roland was getting ready for work when he noticed Layla seemed sick. He had prepared a meal and told her to eat it whenever she felt like it. Layla tried to speak, explaining the possible cause of her condition, but quickly dismissed it and just asked for a kiss. Roland obliged without hesitation and kissed her before leaving for work. Milia found out and was surprised that Layla could get sick. She wondered if Roland could even work at a time like this, which confused him. Until she asked if he had taken Layla to the doctor, Roland said that he hadn't, prompting Milia to tell him he should go home early, because people are vulnerable when they're sick and feel lonelier when they're weak. Milia admitted that if no one took care of her when she was sick, she'd complain about it for a whole year. She went to relay the message to the branch manager, saying that she would make dinner after work, while Roland would take Layla to the doctor and stay with her. Roland left quickly, walking through the city, wondering what he was going to do since he didn't think a human doctor could examine a demon. But just as Roland was about to enter the house, he saw that the door was already open. This made him suspicious, and he entered the silent house on high alert. He slowly advanced into the bedroom, only to find Layla wasn't in bed. Her clothes were still on the bed, while the other dress she usually wore was gone, meaning she had just changed. Roland could feel the bed was still warm, so Layla couldn't be far, and it was unlikely she went shopping since he surely would have seen her on his way back. He noticed traces of magical power on the bed, making Roland wonder if the survivors from the Demon Lord's army had discovered she was alive, or if Layla had regained her powers. But he decided the first possibility seemed more plausible, because if Layla were truly powerful, he would have noticed right away. This meant she was still wearing the collar. The magical power seemed to be heading south, and Roland followed it, taking off his glasses. He noticed that it was heading towards the kingdom of Badenhark, or the kingdom of Eurovinson. It passed through the city and into a dense forest, stopping in a certain area. As Roland looked up and took a moment to sense the energy, he quickly found it. Roland approached the place where he felt the strange presence and called the person out. A dark elf girl appeared, smiling and saying she was wondering who had been following her, only to realize it was a human. Roland wasn't frightened by the news of her race, just sighing as he confirmed that it was just a dark elf, which made the girl look offended. He told the dark elf that Layla must be safe and demanded she return her to him, but she didn't seem to want to talk to him. The dark elf girl had wanted to thank Roland for hiding Layla, but he just replied calmly that it was nothing, which angered her again and she tried to attack. Roland quickly dodged all the attacks, while telling her she should be on her guard. The girl laughed and said she wouldn't be easily fooled by a human's trick, but there really was something behind her. Roland had summoned small shadows to attack her, The girl was surprised and bewildered to see a human who could use 4th-level magic. He explained that Layla had taught him and called the dark elf inferior to a human, making her even angrier. As Roland summoned more shadows, the dark elf said that the maximum number should only be 6, and wondered if the shadows had their own consciousness based on the way they moved. Roland simply said that he was controlling all of them. The girl angrily slammed her blade into the ground, causing the shadows to flee in fear. But she didn't see Roland approaching, and simply tapped her on the forehead, sending her flying into a tree. Roland looked over and saw Layla, but the dark elf was about to wake up, so Roland decided to use a bit of magic to stop her from interfering. After doing so, Roland went to Layla's side and dispelled the magic that had been cast on her, causing her to slowly wake up, and dazedly asked why Roland was there. She explained that her subordinate was asking a favor of her, and that it would be faster for her to explain, wondering where the girl, Rosie, had gone, since she was supposed to have carried her while she was in a deep sleep. Roland called Rosie over, and Layla realized that the dark elf was under a true nightmare spell, and was acting like a dog. Layla found it amusing, but Rosie was still her subordinate. Rosie wanted Roland to dispel the magic, and he did so. Rosie dazedly wondered why she had been acting like a dog, while Roland asked if she had fun. However, Rosie got angry at his words and drew her weapon until Layla told her to stop, saying she wouldn't let anyone touch her husband. The dark elf girl was confused, as she didn't understand what the word husband meant, so Layla explained that she shouldn't underestimate this man. Layla said that she couldn't even last 30 minutes against him, and had surrendered after just 10, shocking Rosie because the time was getting shorter and shorter. Suddenly, Roland jumped in and said that Layla didn't even last 5 minutes the first time, flustering Layla, who lightly slapped him, asking him not to mention that in front of her subordinate. Layla explained to Rosie that she had accepted Roland and vowed to devote herself to him, but Rosie still felt she couldn't accept Roland. Getting back to the point, Roland asked Rosie why she tried to take Layla away, and with a nod from Layla, Rosie began to explain. She had found Layla's body and immediately realized it was a fake, because it didn't have the mole on her butt. Layla laughed and said she didn't have a mole like that, but both Rosie and Erlin agreed that there really was one. Rosie continued, saying that after several months had passed, some members of the demon army had proposed attacking the humans again to avenge the demon lord's defeat. She wanted everyone to know that Layla was actually alive, so the extremists would lose their reason to fight. Rosie even believed that retreating was a wise decision. The person currently preparing to lead the invasion is someone named Corneliu Vazari, a name that Layla seemed to recognize. Humans may think the war is over, but for the demons, it's far from finished. Originally, demons lived on a separate continent called Makai, but one day they invaded the humans after using teleportation magic. The demons continued to try and seize as much territory as possible until the 7 kings formed an allied force to defend against the main forces, while a special group of heroes would infiltrate the castle and defeat the demon king. However, many demons still lurked around the castle area, which is why a portion of the allied forces still guards that area. Roland told Layla that she probably wouldn't be able to stop them, which she already knew, but still wanted to believe they would listen to her as their demon king. She said that the war the demons started was a mistake, and that Layla wanted to atone for her sins, as her final responsibility as the demon king. Roland promised he would do whatever he could to help her. Layla was conflicted, since she didn't want humans to find out he hadn't killed her, but Roland insisted that he had killed the demon king, but that he didn't want anyone to kill her. As Layla came to terms with his words, the demon girl burst into tears and hugged Roland tightly while Rosie was moved by the scene before her. The 3 of them traveled together through the forest, heading towards a gate that Rosie had set up near a hut. It used teleportation magic and would lead them to a place where Rosie explained there were likely more than 2,000 individuals, including monsters, which would overwhelm the security forces around the castle. They were close to the hut, but when they arrived, they discovered that the gate had been destroyed. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the air, causing everyone to turn and see. A small individual sitting on a nearby hill, asking Rosie what she was doing with a human. The stranger was called Delacroix, and Layla stepped forward to call her name, announcing that it was her, and that she wanted to speak with Corneliu. Delacroix gritted her teeth and told Layla to shut up, saying that even if Layla was truly alive, it didn't matter anymore. The small demon used magic to transform into a dragon and began to prepare a breath attack. When Roland asked Rosie if she could block Delacroix's attack, she replied that she could, but only once. Relieved, Roland then asked her to protect the useless woman, Layla, which offended both girls, even though it wasn't entirely wrong given the situation. Rosie immediately used her magic to create a shield for herself and Layla, boasting that no one could possibly do anything to Delacre. But when they opened their eyes, Roland was gone. The dragon unleashed its attack, but both girls survived. Rosie wondered where Roland had gone, questioning if he had run away. However, Roland had reappeared right in front of Delacre. The beast was stunned and tried to launch an attack at Roland, but he simply summoned a small ball of fire, sending it flying toward the dragon. Delacre's was forced back, but it wasn't enough. Roland relentlessly attacked Delacre, forcing the monster out of its dragon form and causing it to fall to the ground, unconscious. Rosie was furious that Roland had defeated Delacre so easily, but now the three of them needed a new way to get to the isolated island. Layla had an idea and asked if Roland could learn this magic. Roland confidently replied that he could, as long as it wasn't as complex as shadow magic. One lesson later, Roland easily summoned a portal, leaving Rosie to hang her head and sigh, wondering how a human could possibly do such a thing. She lamented about how hard she had trained to learn magic, and Layla tried to comfort her by saying that Roland was just a man more talented than even the demon race, which seemed to ease the dark elf's mind a little. When it was time to go, the three of them held hands, as Roland chanted the spell and teleported them to their destination, earning praise from Layla. They finally arrived near the meeting place, and Rosie warned Roland not to do anything reckless. But he just asked if he should kill all the demons, since there were only about 2,000 of them. Rosie laughed and told him he could try if he wanted. Layla told the dark elf to stop, insisting that Roland wasn't joking. But that only left Rosie feeling confused. They would move out after a short while, and Layla told Roland she wanted to talk to them before he decided to kill anyone, as she didn't want anyone else to die if it could be avoided. A short time later, it was time to move, but Rosie quickly realized there were no guards at the tower they planned to pass through. As they got closer, they heard roars and cheers, making the dark elf realize that today was the day of action, something they hadn't informed her about. Roland explained that the dragon was probably just keeping an eye on her, since they never trusted her. But she still wanted to believe they could do it, especially since they had a doctor to check on Layla's condition. The three of them climbed up and saw the massive army gathering, but Layla still tried to stand firm and got everyone's attention, announcing that she was still alive. Rosie tried to support her, and everyone started to cheer as Layla apologized and said they should stop their revenge and return to Makai, leaving all the demons confused, because no one believed that the real Layla would say such a thing. None of the demons could sense any magical power from Layla due to her necklace, and they began to suspect she wasn't the real Layla. All the demons went back to cheering with excitement and a thirst for revenge. They were about to have a war against the humans. Roland and Layla realized that the army was heading towards the area where Miley lived, which meant she would be in danger. Layla tried to get their attention again, but no one looked her way. Layla fell to her knees, still trying to make someone hear her, but her cries were drowned out by the army's cheers. The demons in the army roared with cheers while Layla and Rosie watched and Roland hid behind a rock. Rosie tried to comfort Layla until she'd had enough and stood up with an angry expression, yelling at everyone not to underestimate her. She declared that it wasn't that she didn't have magical power, but that she no longer needed it because she had learned the world's strongest skill: instant death. Cornelius scoffed and said she was lying, but Layla simply replied by telling him to return to the demon world, saying it was her final warning. He continued confidently, telling the other demons to ignore her as they would rebuild the Demon King's army and conquer the human nations. Layla called him a fool and said he'd always been that way, which was also why he used to be so reliable. She raised her hand and Roland prepared to summon an attack, so she could strike Cornelio. In just a few seconds, as tears rolled down Layla's cheeks, Cornelio also began to cry, calling out to Layla weakly, finally realizing she wasn't a fake before he died. When he died, all the demons in the army wept for his passing. They were confused, not understanding what had happened, and why Cornelio's own sword had pierced its master. But with enough whispers and thought, the demons began to believe that Layla was indeed their former leader, all thanks to the magic that Roland had secretly used to help her. Layla stood at the edge of the cliff and ordered everyone to obey her, or they would meet the same fate as Cornelio. Everyone obeyed without a hint of hesitation or complaint, and in time, all of them would be sent back to the demon world through the portal Rosie created. Layla was talking to Roland, asking how he knew what she was thinking. He just replied calmly that it was obvious, since only he could do something like that. She chuckled and said he did a great job substituting for her skill, but that wasn't the priority. Roland remembered that the army should have a doctor and wondered if they were going to return. Layla assured him that the doctors would be on standby in the barracks during this time. Even though his expression seemed blank, he was still worried about Layla's health, which made her try to tease him. But it didn't affect him much. He told her they should go get a checkup, but she suddenly let go of Roland's hand and said she needed to go by herself, leaving him confused as she walked away. Roland stared into the distance when Rosie came over and got his attention, asking where Layla went. Roland explained that she had just gone to see the doctor and probably didn't want anyone else to see her. Rosie laughed and said she didn't want to be associated with people like him, as Layla was said to trust the dark elf woman deeply. Compared to Roland, Rosie just kept bragging about herself and asked if he wanted to hear about her stories and memories with Layla. But he was completely uninterested, though she continued without any hesitation. A while later, Rosie finished her story and the number of demons passing through the portal began to decrease, meaning there was only a little time left until everyone had retreated. Rosie was still amazed by Layla's power, believing that the skill she had used earlier was Layla's own power. This led Rosie to warn Roland that he should be careful not to let Layla get into a bad mood. She also mentioned that he might get killed, since he was of no more value to her, but Roland just looked at Rosie with pity. Because she didn't know that he was the one who had created the attack, Roland wanted to ask Rosie one thing. Why was she willing to do so much for Layla, when dark elves had absolutely nothing to do with demons? His words surprised her, as it seemed he didn't know much about how the Demon Lord was chosen. He already knew that the Demon Lord wasn't chosen through genetics, but despite that, Rosie explained that Layla was still the daughter of the previous Demon Lord and had become the Demon Lord herself. Layla had always shown exceptional talent since she was a child, and allowed no one to object when she became the Demon Lord, leading Roland to believe that others who aspired to the position must have held grudges. Rosie, with a gentle expression, admitted that she and many others would also sacrifice themselves for Layla. There was one more thing Roland wanted to ask, which made Rosie wonder if he was a liar. But he went on to ask who had ordered her to do all those things. If she were like the moderates, she would have stayed with the others in the demon world and considered Therotical's actions as merely something to take note of. He asked her the purpose of going through so much trouble to find Layla and inform her about the rebellion. Rosie replied that she was simply following the orders of Layla's father, the Great Lord. She had informed the Great Lord of Layla's condition, and he had told her to tell Layla about the rebellion, as she would likely try to stop it. This made Roland realize that Layla's father couldn't just sit back and let the extremists die for nothing. The Dark Elf girl said it was surprising that Layla had become so helpless, but fortunately there was a reliable man by her side. Hearing these words, Rosie felt confused and said that those were just Layla's words, but Roland changed the subject and said it was time to check on Layla. They arrived at the camp and asked the doctor about Layla's condition, but the old woman just told them to go and see for themselves. Roland and Rosie entered the building and saw Layla lying under the covers, feeling embarrassed about her condition. Layla was uncomfortable explaining things with Rosie there, so Roland pushed the Dark Elf out. After a moment of hesitation, Layla told Roland that she was just testing some new recipes a few days ago and did a lot of taste tests, only to discover that the ingredients were bad. Roland asked Layla if she was slow on the uptake, which made her even more flustered, but all Roland knew was that he was happy to see her safe. Layla was confused as to why only she got poisoned when they both ate the same dish. Roland explained that a little poison wouldn't affect him, as he had been trained to withstand it. She felt unintentionally offended, thinking he was saying her food was poisonous, but he confirmed that it was. Even so, Roland patted her head and said that she didn't need to worry when talking to him, and that she could try out new recipes again, which made her feel warm inside. Before he could kiss her, Rosie and the doctor entered the building. The old woman gave Layla some digestive medicine for her stomach. Before everyone left, the Dark Elf said she would be returning to the demon world for a while, as she had something to do. Roland and Layla finally returned home. Roland knew he would have to apologize to Iris for being absent for a day. Layla suddenly spoke up, saying the doctor's diagnosis wasn't what she had hoped for, and shyly asked Roland what he would do if she were pregnant. The question caught him by surprise, but he understood why she asked, since the two had become very intimate with each other. Layla admitted that she would be very happy to have a child with Roland. He replied that when that happened, they would still aim for a normal life with the child. Meanwhile, a knight named Elvi knelt before King Randolph, thanking him for accepting the request of a small nation. The old king said it was the right thing to do as she was a friend of Almeria's, and came from a line of knights who fought brilliantly in the war against the demons. They were making a deal for the prosperity of both nations, trying to arrange for Almeria to marry a man named Fabian. Though Randolph didn't think his daughter would be happy with the situation, he hoped that she wouldn't throw a tantrum and lock herself away, which made him think of asking for Roland's help. But he couldn't rely on the black-haired young man every time a situation involving Almeria came up. With an indirect apology, Randolph felt as if he had gotten himself into a troublesome situation that required Roland's help. The next day, Roland returned to work as usual and was reviewing various requests sent to the guild with Milia. At one point during their work, something was weighing on Roland's mind, and he decided to ask the girl for her opinion. He didn't hide the truth, but he lied and said he heard it from a friend. Roland explained that his friend's lover said she would be very happy if she got pregnant, and upon hearing that, his friend wanted to hug her. Roland wanted to know why he would feel those emotions. Milia slammed her hands on the table and explained with excitement that it meant his friend was definitely happy and in love, which made her think happily about the couple. Milia then went back to reviewing the requests and changed the subject when she found one she thought was suitable for Roland, as it involved a client who was having trouble with their plundered orchard. They finished sorting all the requests, and Roland went to investigate that one, borrowing a horse and taking Layla with him in her cat form. The orchard they were heading to had fruits called onatsu, a yellow fruit that was both sweet and sour. Roland was confused as to why Layla was asking about them, until she said she had an emotional attachment to this mission, because those fruits were used to make one of her favorite foods, onatsu pie. Roland tried to reassure her that many people sell these fruits as they traveled down the road leading to the orchard. Suddenly, a giant gorilla appeared from the trees surrounding them, but neither Roland nor Layla were worried, as both were preoccupied with thoughts of the onatsu fruits. Roland began to slash at any monkey that tried to get near them. The two speculated that someone had been stealing the fruit from the trees, but they weren't sure what the thieves were doing with the fruit, so they decided to apprehend the people responsible for this crime. When they arrived, Roland introduced himself to the couple, who explained that they were just a husband and wife living in Field's End, making a living from their orchard's income. They knew that if the thefts continued, their livelihood would be in danger. Roland was saddened by the situation, mainly because the culprit was robbing the couple of their normal life. Hogan, the husband, wanted to find the thief himself until he realized it might be too dangerous for him, which was a wise move. The wife noticed Layla, who was sitting on the floor, staring intently at a plate of onatsu on the table, and asked Roland if it was okay to feed the cat onatsu. Roland replied that they were actually her favorite. In the end, Lila got to have a few pieces while the three of them continued their discussion. In addition to the thief being able to climb the fence, Hogan recalled that the footprints were the size of an adult's, and that there was also drool on the trees and the ground. The thought of a grown adult drooling everywhere left Roland confused about who or what could be stealing the fruit, but Hogan interrupted his thoughts to ask how much they should pay for the job. The dark-haired man explained that the fee varies depending on the mission's rank, and this particular job would likely be a C or D rank. However, this news made the couple hesitate, as it could mean a hefty fee. Layla, however, seemed to have an idea, and got Roland's attention, saying she had a feeling she knew who the culprit was, which reminded them both of all the giant gorillas they had killed on their way there. He explained to the couple that their orchard probably wouldn't be raided anymore if the gorillas were, in fact, the culprits. Roland still wasn't sure if it was those monsters, until Hogan's wife said she had seen them at night. Roland decided to take her outside to see the gorillas' bodies, further confirming his suspicions when she recognized them. Roland admitted that he was the one who had defeated the gorillas, but he knew that didn't mean it was over. Layla told Roland that giant gorillas are forest dwellers, so Roland decided to check the nearby forest to see what was going on. They headed into the forest, with Layla speculating that the monsters might have come from the woods due to a food shortage. Upon entering the forest, they noticed it had very few fruits and nuts, confirming the food shortage theory. The monkeys in the forest looked thin and very wary, and were unlikely to attack the two of them. But the creatures seemed untrusting. Then a loud noise echoed through the forest, and Layla recognized it as an omnivorous monster. They spotted its head peeking out from the trees. The horse got spooked, so they had to go investigate on foot. Realizing it wasn't just stealing the gorillas' food, but was also eating the gorillas themselves, Layla wanted to use her skills as a demon queen. She hopped off Roland's shoulder to try and talk to the Plesius, But she seemed to realize the Plesius was unlikely to leave. This angered her, and she decided to wait on the horse while Roland took off his glasses and showed the monster no mercy. In just a few seconds, Roland managed to grab the Plesius and spin it around to make it dizzy, creating an opening for him to use the fallen trees to impale and kill the monster. Finally, they made it out of the forest. Roland asked Layla if she knew the monster, but she dodged the question, simply telling him she had decided to bring her former subordinates from the human world back to the demon world. Roland said he would help her, as he felt it was his responsibility to protect people's everyday lives. Layla was about to say that in the demon world, there are very few Plesius. But Roland saw no reason for her to mention that, which made her laugh and decide to drop it. When Roland returned to the guild, Iris was already there and asked Roland why he took so long, causing him to apologize. She was confused as to why he was apologizing, but Roland said that she sounded angry based on her tone of voice, which made her feel conflicted about how to act around Roland. Iris told him to sit down so they could talk about the report. Iris mentioned that because Roland had defeated the Plesius, adventurers in the guild had gone to the forest to try and claim the spoils. He said that he already knew and admitted that he might have acted impulsively, but Iris didn't see it as an impulsive decision, as she respected that he helps people in need. Roland's gaze was still focused elsewhere as Iris continued to explain that it's important to build trust through the relationship between staff and clients, which Roland had done very well. Iris also thanked him for bringing Onatsu along, and said that would be all for the report. But she remembered that there was a request the king sent for Roland and handed it to him to read later. Roland took it, and before leaving, he decided to tell Iris that her underwear was showing the entire time, and he thought she was doing it on purpose, which made the woman incredibly flustered, while he quickly made his exit. Just a few days later, the guild received a gift from the orchard. Roland gave everyone 2 fruits each, and gave Iris 3, which seemed to calm her down and make her less upset than last time. Roland brought the rest home, knowing that they were Layla's favorite, which touched her with his thoughtfulness. She happily took a bite of the one Roland offered her. Later, Roland accepted the request from the king to be a bodyguard at Almeria's wedding, and told Iris he'd be on a business trip. But Layla thought he was being taken advantage of. Roland said that regular employees don't turn down job offers. They saw a crowd in the distance, approaching to see King Randolph, and happened to see him getting cozy with a younger woman. The 2 of them panicked and screamed, before Roland shooed the woman away and got into the carriage to discuss the request with Randolph. Since Roland didn't want to get involved in political matters, Randolph said he could refuse if he wanted to, but Roland sighed and said he could help since he was already there, which made the old man ecstatic. They were now on their way to the Somali coast, a neutral territory which made Roland feel at ease being there. He didn't have much information to give Roland other than that Almeria's marriage partner was Fabian Rubens, the first prince of the Rubens kingdom, and his envoy was the knight Elvi. Roland recognized the name Elvi and knew that the Rubens kingdom was the second most powerful force against the Demon Lord's army, and that Elvi was part of his party before they defeated the Demon Lord, as Elvi was like a sister to Almeria. Randolph didn't have the heart to refuse her, and he knew that if the marriage was successful, they would form an alliance, as long as Almeria didn't refuse. Roland noticed that Randolph was slowly shedding his image as a doting father, asking him if he could stop flirting with the woman from before, as they were being loud from a distance. This made the old man laugh, as he knew full well, and was doing it so his men wouldn't get bored during the trip. Finally, they arrived at a small town to rest for a while, and Randolph decided to introduce the knight commander, Gregor, to Roland. The commander laughed when he learned that Roland had introduced himself as a guild employee, prompting Roland to ask the old man who else knew he was there. Randolph replied that until he met Gregor, only the king knew. Roland asked Gregor if he hadn't recognized him in the king's carriage, explaining that the king himself had summoned him, but in the knight's eyes, Roland should have been seen as a suspicious character. Layla jumped in to insult the knights, which offended Gregor, and he immediately drew his sword. But Roland stopped him, preventing him from drawing his weapon, saying that if he were an assassin, the king would have been dead long ago. Layla once again started mocking the knights, but Roland couldn't take it anymore, simply stuffing her into a bag and tying it shut to stop her from talking. Randolph told Roland that they would let the matter slide, and he told Gregor that Roland could be trusted because he was Almeria's tutor, causing Gregor to immediately apologize and change his attitude. In the evening, they were to hand over command to Roland, but everyone seemed to accept it upon learning that Roland was just Almeria's tutor. He told everyone to split into groups of 10 and arrange themselves around the carriage, with 2 messengers in each group. Gregor asked him what he should do, and Roland told him to go on foot, unless he wanted to ride a horse. To be a messenger. They set off, and Layla rode on her horse next to Roland, feeling that the scenery was much nicer without the knights so close by. She jokingly asked if he wanted to join her army, because with him by their side, they would have surely won more battles. But Roland just joked back, saying she should be careful with him, as he was stronger than her. Although she pouted, Layla still had the last word, saying that they would have an army of demons once they were blessed with a child. Later, after they had set off, one of the groups Roland had created reported an attack by a group of bandits, whose numbers quickly grew to nearly 100 men. Roland told the messengers to have the other groups form a tight formation, while he went to scout the area. Layla was impressed to see the knights still doing their jobs well, even though she thought they were terrible. Roland went over, taking one of the knights' weapons and cutting down several bandits. He told the knights to hold their formation and teach the bandits that they couldn't be underestimated, motivating everyone. Roland would deal with the one who seemed to be the leader. This person didn't seem worried at all, until Roland told him to pay attention to the enemy. The stranger tried to attack Roland, but he easily parried the blow and snatched the bandit's weapon, then slashed at his arm and stabbed him in the head before he could even cast a spell. All the remaining bandits were shocked by this and started to flee. With no major casualties on the knight's side, Roland praised everyone, but the moment was interrupted by Almeria, who charged into the area with the energy to destroy the enemy. Roland explained that they had already retreated. She turned around and saw Roland immediately, which made her excited, not thinking he was there to stop the marriage. Roland said he was just a bodyguard, but the princess wouldn't listen to him, and told him he should rest assured because she would refuse the marriage. Another group entered and reported to Roland that Reuben's army was approaching, causing Almeria to leave immediately, uninterested. They welcomed Prince Fabian, who was glad to see everyone was okay with no major casualties, and asked if Roland had captured the bandit leader. Roland replied that he had killed him, causing Fabian to look down for a moment, before smiling and praising what they had done. Why did he hesitate for a bit? In the end, Fabian and the rest of the army had to leave to meet the king of their country and departed quickly. Roland knew that Fabian marrying Almeria would become the biggest story since the defeat of the Demon Lord, making them both hope that everything would go well. Layla was finally able to get out of her cat form and ran around the beach where they would be staying while the marriage was about to take place. She told Roland that she was going to play for a while he would be called by someone to go see the king, and witnessed Almeria saying that she, her father, Fabian, and King Rubens would have dinner together. She hesitantly said that she wasn't feeling well that day, but Randolph said they would be there, so she shouldn't say such selfish things. Roland entered the room to offer his greetings, and the girl greeted King Randolph, who told her that she was the daughter of a king, and she should grow up a little. Almeria bowed her head and said she understood. Afterward, the servants accompanying Almeria returned to her room to prepare for dinner, but Randolph stood there with a sigh. He seemed worried about what was to come, as the girl would have to meet the prince alone the next day. Elvie entered the room to greet them, and she greeted King Randolph, who told her she didn't need to be so formal with him. She was there because she was worried about Almeria. As a member of the Hayden's family, she had a great responsibility in bringing the two families together. Elve turned back with a smile to see where Almeria was, but she was only met by Roland's empty gaze and presence, which confused her for a moment, until she got angry and yelled at him, asking where he had been. The girl started to cry and explained that everyone had been looking for him everywhere, and they all thought he had died somewhere. But Roland cut her off, saying that while he knew she had a lot to say, they needed to save it for later, because he had something he wanted to ask first. After some discussion on the beach, a lady in an extremely elegant dress was looking out at the sea. Roland walked out and asked if she thought the view was beautiful, catching her attention and asking her to confirm that she was Prince Fabian's secretary. She recognized him as the commander of Farron's royal guard, and he asked if he was bothering her, trying to be charming and subtle about his plan. The girl said that he wasn't. He told her he was just taking a walk, hoping to see something, and that he'd finally found it. This made her laugh and ask what that was. Roland had taken her to dinner, and they had a wonderful time laughing together, but the day had to come to an end. Eventually, they walked through the quiet streets together, and Lenora felt happy because this was the first time a man had ever asked her out like this. Her face flushed from having had quite a bit to drink, drawn in by her cheerful mood. Roland said he knew a quiet place where they could rest and continue their night. She hesitated for a moment, before blushing even more and agreeing. Meanwhile, Layla was sitting alone on the beach, crying because she felt so lonely after Roland left. But finally he returned, making her indescribably happy. She turned back into her cat form, and Roland headed back with her. She explained that she'd been so excited by the beach and the waves that she hadn't noticed when he left so quickly, which made her feel very lonely. Eventually, they arrived at the room where they would be staying. Layla excitedly jumped onto the bed, letting out a sigh of relief to finally be able to lie down. Roland looked out the window, knowing it was time for a certain event. He used magic to summon a shadow to keep an eye on the event. He knew the situation was similar to what happened with Balder, and it seemed he couldn't easily cut ties with the people he knew. Meanwhile, Almeria was having a private meeting with the prince, and he asked if she was tired and wanted to rest. She reluctantly agreed. They sat at a small table and began to eat and drink. Fabian offered her some pineapple juice, and Almeria just nodded silently. This made the boy tense up as his face darkened. Because he knew Almeria didn't look as interested as usual. Her attitude clearly showed she felt forced to be with him. Fabian tried to smile, though his eyes were filled with rage because he was furious that she seemed to look down on him, just because she was a hero. He usually didn't forgive women who didn't admire him, but this time he found the situation more interesting. He watched her drink, wondering what Almeria's face would look like when everything went according to his plan. She noticed his stare and asked why he was doing that. Fabian lied, saying he was captivated by her beauty, then quickly changed the subject and asked her how she liked the drink. Although Miria remained cold, she said it wasn't bad. But Fabian knew her attitude would soon change, and he would have the chance to do as he pleased. Suddenly something changed as she pulled away from her glass. Fabian called for her attention. Almeria looked at him and said his name, with a hint of unnerving respect. He took her hand and asked if she would agree to marry him and become the next queen of the kingdom. With lifeless eyes, Almeria agreed, and Fabian happily said they should inform his father during the upcoming luncheon. Almeria seemed to agree as well, but it was clear the decision wasn't her own. The prince gave a wicked smile, believing the princess was now in his grasp, and he would finally make the hero, who had no interest in him, do his bidding until he was satisfied. However, a small sound startled him, thinking it was the floorboards creaking, but it was actually the sound of the shadow Roland had summoned leaving. Fabian returned to the villa and greeted his father. Fabian said that everything was going according to plan. King Reuben sneered and said that with this, the kingdom of Farrand would fall into the hands of the Reubens family. They both eagerly awaited the luncheon. The luncheon soon began. All 4 members of the royal family sat and ate, while the others stood to the side. King Reuben started a conversation and asked his son about his morning stroll with the princess. Both Fabian and Almeria stood up from the table side by side, and Fabian announced that he had something to report. He said that he had proposed to Almeria and she had accepted, causing the entire room to erupt. In shock and disbelief, Fabian's father told everyone to calm down, while Fabian moved in to kiss Almeria. But she whispered something. He moved closer and asked her what she had just said, until Almeria suddenly punched the prince in the face, saying she had told him not to come any closer. He went flying across the room, his clothes stained with food. But what confused him more was that Almeria had broken free from the trance he had put her under. Fabian looked at her in surprise, wondering why the love potion wasn't working, because he'd heard it was supposed to last for several months, if not a whole year. The prince looked around, searching for who might have ruined his plan. And just then he saw Roland, who was smirking. This confirmed Fabian's suspicions. King Reuben stepped forward and asked what was going on, but Fabian tried to claim that Almeria was the one who hit him first. Almeria shot back that it was because he tried to force a kiss on her. She called him several unsavory names, but Elvi stepped forward telling Almeria to calm down, since they didn't yet understand the full situation. Almeria explained that the prince had tried to kiss her against her will. But Fabian denied it, saying she had said things earlier that proved she consented. The argument went on until Roland stepped forward, saying that he would explain everything, which surprised Randolph, who didn't think Roland knew anything about the situation. Roland said that after Almeria returned from her date, she seemed to be in an intoxicated state, so she likely didn't remember the proposal. Therefore, he helped her sober up so she could attend the luncheon without any issues. Fabian objected, arguing that there was no way Almeria could be drunk since she only had juice. But Roland knew better and said that the prince had done something to rob the princess of her ability to make her own decisions, enraging Fabian with the accusation. The black-haired man felt things were reaching a stalemate and called for a witness to enter the room. Lenora entered the dining hall and was asked if it was true that Fabian had prepared something before the date. The woman confirmed this, and admitted that the prince had ordered her to give a large sum of money to the cafe's staff and have them spike Almeria's juice with a love potion. Fabian started to panic, trying to scream for Lenora to shut up. But it was too late as everyone turned to look at him with disgust. The prince screamed at Lenora, but she retorted and asked if he even remembered her name. Fabian continued to glare at her, but hesitated, unable to answer. Lenora cried tears of anger and said she wanted nothing more to do with a person like him. All eyes in the room turned to Fabian, including his father's, making him feel cornered. In a fit of rage, he screamed that everyone was trying to frame him, but Almeria calmly replied that he was the one who had tried to trap her. Everyone in the room began to feel sorry for Lenora and worry about the fate of her family after she dared to stand up to the prince. However, Randolph reassured her that she had no need to worry because she had done the right thing by bravely speaking the truth, even if it meant defying her master. From now on, he would ensure that the kingdom of Farrand would take care of her and her family no matter what. King Reuben still wanted to salvage the situation. He feigned an apology to King Randolph for his son's behavior and hoped he could overlook it as a folly of youth. Fabian was confused, not understanding why his own father was turning his back on him, but King Rubens insisted that he knew nothing about the situation. He then continued trying to spin the situation, arguing that while it was regrettable that Fabian tried to force a kiss on the princess, he didn't believe that the princess was drugged and then cured, or that any potion existed that could rob someone of their decision-making abilities. Almeria, as the victim, tried to testify, but King Rubens dismissed her words, asking if she was trying to incite a war between the two nations, causing her to start backing away. Roland had anticipated that the king would be a smooth talker, and when Elvie tried to jump in to defend Almeria, she was also stopped by King Rubens, who said he was expecting great things from her. He also said that the testimony and report came from just one guild member, with no concrete evidence, and he suspected that Roland might be colluding with the princess to frame Fabian. Randolph and Elvie quickly joined the argument, both unwilling to let King Rubens tarnish their honor. As things began to escalate, Roland decided that was enough, and he took off his glasses, mentioning something about a Friday purge, which made King Rubens instantly realize Roland was the assassin he once knew. His demeanor changed immediately, and he backed down. King Rubens quickly retracted everything he had said and tried to pin all the blame on Fabian, hoping to salvage the situation. Randolph said that they were fathers before they were kings, and they needed to take responsibility for their children. Hearing this, King Rubens and his son bowed their heads and apologized for their actions. King Randolph forgave them, but said they would have to atone for this incident. Then he quickly left. Meanwhile, King Rubens remained seated, clutching his leg in frustration. The old king chuckled, pleased that he had brought Roland along, which helped everything go smoothly. However, Elvie and Almeria wanted to ask Roland about the Friday purge, especially after seeing King Rubens panic like that for the first time. Unfortunately, the time had come for Elvie to depart, and she grew anxious, wanting to spend more time with Roland. Elvie kept asking a barrage of questions, from where he lived to whether there was anyone in his heart. But Roland didn't want to answer these questions, simply telling her to go, which led Almeria to tease Elvie about the situation. Elvie said she would write to Roland every 3 days. But Roland told her that was too much, as a new letter would arrive before the previous one even reached him, leaving Elvie feeling both confused and annoyed. Finally, she departed, while Almeria walked with Roland and asked the same kinds of questions as Elvie, along with a few others, but Roland didn't answer her either. When they happened to run into Layla, the cat girl decided to introduce herself to Almeria, which made the girl excited, delighted to see an animal. Layla told Almeria that a good woman should be the one who is pursued by a man, and these words made Almeria start to see Layla as a mentor. Layla went on to explain that she had far more experience than Almeria could ever have in her lifetime. Roland realized it was time for him to leave and went to find Randolph to say his goodbyes. Randolph felt guilty for having troubled Roland. The old man sighed in frustration and admitted that no matter how ordinary Roland's life was, he would not have objected if Almeria had married Roland. Roland apologized and refused, causing Randolph to sigh. The king said he would just have to produce an heir himself. Roland, not quite believing it, made a bet of 100,000 rin that Randolph would retire at the age of 57. Randolph replied that he would win within the next 8 years, and the one who guessed the age most accurately would be the winner. Everyone returned to their daily lives. Layla felt happy that she had met Almeria on good terms and hoped to become friends with the princess. Something she learned from Almeria, because friends were something that ordinary people had. Layla remembered something and asked Roland why he had helped the royal family in the first place, when he didn't want to get involved and could have just ignored everything. However, Layla believed that Roland had probably started to see them as friends he needed to care for. This new insight seemed to open up a new perspective for Roland, as he realized that helping others, even if they were connected to the royal family, wasn't such a bad thing. Putting that aside, Layla suddenly wore an angry expression because she knew Roland had slept with another woman the night before. She wanted to make it clear that while she didn't care what he did with others, she still wanted to be the one woman who was beyond comparison. Layla continued to argue, until she became flustered, while Roland just chuckled softly, pulling her closer and kissing her as they stood on the beach. The next day, Roland went to work, and Melia approached him, saying that someone was watching them, making the adventurers feel like they were being stalked. Roland looked out the window and saw Rosie leaning against a wall, which startled Melia. Roland said he would handle it, and then the black-haired man stepped outside. Roland went outside and asked Rosie what she wanted. She tried to lie, saying she was just taking a walk, but since she was terrible at lying, Roland quickly figured out that she had been watching him ever since he and Layla had their moment. The previous night, Roland asked multiple times, in various ways, if this was her subtle way of asking to join in, which made Rosie flustered. Finally, she had to admit that she was just evaluating whether he was a suitable partner for Layla. Roland told her that instead of sneaking around from the window, she could just come inside the guild to observe. He walked in, drawing everyone's attention as most had never seen an elf, especially one of Rosie's stature. Roland told her to watch from a distance and not to draw any attention, then went back to Melia to explain the situation, and told her that Rosie might be into him. Melia disagreed, saying that was impossible since Rosie just seemed to have a sly grin on her face whenever she looked at Roland. Melia went on to explain that when a woman likes a man, she acts in certain ways. And Rosie was showing all the signs, which only made Roland more convinced that Rosie might be falling for him. Melia also advised him that if a woman ever has a crush on you, you shouldn't act annoyed or ignore her, but to treat her with kindness. Come lunchtime, Roland stepped out of the guild hall, making Rosie think he was about to throw away Layla's lunch. But he just sat down, saying he was looking for a quiet place to eat, which made Rosie regret her assumption. Roland told her he wanted to share the meal with her, leaving Rosie flustered. Even though she was happy about the offer, she reluctantly accepted and enjoyed the delicious meal, before getting back to her mission, watching Roland like a hawk. The dark elf Rosie watched closely as Roland went about his usual workday, until Iris approached him and asked him to meet her somewhere next Monday. Rosie immediately demanded to know if they were discussing secrets and if Roland was plotting something. But he simply said he was going on a business trip and asked if she wanted to tag along, which only infuriated her all over again. Later, one of the guild members kept pestering Roland to join them for a drinking party, but Roland was hesitant since he didn't see the point in drinking with people he didn't know. But when the guild member mentioned that drinking parties were a normal way to meet new people, the word normal was all it took for Roland to change his mind. Rosie quickly ran up to the men heading for the bar and asked Roland if he was planning to mess around with other girls when he already had Layla. Roland just replied that it was part of his job. Even so, Rosie decided to keep a close eye on him to expose his true colors. Roland reassured everyone that Rosie was harmless, and the group continued on to the tavern. Just before they went in, all the men in the group decided to have a little huddle to decide which girl each of them would go for inside, like some kind of hilarious strategy of conquest. Morley tried to argue that they didn't necessarily have to stick to just one person, but the other two shot him down, saying he couldn't just ignore the rules of teamwork, and that love probably wouldn't find him that way anyway. Finally, the group walked into the tavern, and they all introduced themselves. One of the women, Hilda, asked about Rosie, who was still watching from afar, but Roland told them not to mind her. Two of the women had heard about Roland through Melia, model, and Roland realized that these were the two women that Ryan and Shane had their eyes on. Thanks to his communication skills, Roland had easily steered the conversation between the women and the two men, successfully setting them up with each other. Only Morley was left without a partner. When Roland glanced over, he saw Morley just ogling Diana's chest and decided to just ignore the guy, choosing to drink his wine in silence. After drinking for a while, Roland felt the effects of his communication skills starting to wane. As Diana started a conversation with him, she admitted that she could really hold her liquor, explaining that as an adventurer, she drank whenever she got the chance. Morley suddenly butted into the conversation, asking Roland why he was talking to his girl, while continuing to gawk at Diana's chest. Then, out of nowhere, Morley lunged crudely at Diana, trying to touch her, and spewing inappropriate comments. Roland quickly took Morley down, knocking him unconscious. Everyone else continued to eat and drink cheerfully, while Roland chatted and got to know the two female adventurers better. They mentioned they'd heard that missions handled by Roland always went smoothly, and he explained that he simply helped adventurers reach their full potential, which impressed both women with his professionalism. This made Diana start to suspect that Roland was hiding something behind his calm demeanor. She offered him another drink, and Roland asked if that wasn't a bit much. But Diana was just curious to see if Roland might let something slip if he got drunk, which he took as a challenge since he had never once been drunk in his life. Eventually, it was time for everyone to head home. Roland said goodbye to the men, who thanked him for helping them get to talk to the girls they were interested in. The two men and two women left together, with one of the women getting a piggyback ride. Tom walked beside Roland, and one of the shorter girls asked if they could do this again sometime, to which Roland casually agreed, before walking her back to the inn where she was staying. Diana, the last woman left, led Roland to a quiet, secluded spot, implying they could have a little adventure of their own without being disturbed. However, just as they thought they had some privacy, they were interrupted by a noise in the distance. Roland saw Rosie being harassed by a group of men. He immediately apologized to Diana and said he had something to take care of. Diana chuckled softly as Roland left, knowing she wouldn't let him get away so easily next time. The black-haired man approached the group of men, threatening them by mentioning the rumor that he had as many as 3,000 adventurers under his command. Rosie was surprised by this information, even though she knew it was a lie and an exaggeration. However, Roland only focused on reminding the dark elf girl that she needed to be more careful next time. Rosie thanked him and then suddenly blushed, hastily running away with an angry look, shouting as she ran that she still hadn't acknowledged him. Roland watched her run off, narrowing his eyes slightly, feeling like he was forgetting something, but figuring it probably wasn't important. This might have been due to his earlier conversation with Iris. The branch manager had requested that Roland attend a training session on Monday, and Roland had followed her instructions, bringing Layla along with him. Layla lay on the bed and remarked that it was a bit worse than the previous villa, which had belonged to nobility and couldn't be compared. She looked at the paper Iris had given Roland and wondered why humans had to hold annual training sessions. Roland explained that it was logical, as policies needed to be regularly implemented for everyone in the organization. Layla, the demon woman, wasn't very interested in what was happening, only eagerly waiting for Roland to return so they could eat. Roland, though reluctant, agreed. Layla planned to explore the city while Roland was away, but he warned her that the guards had been reinforced in the city because the princess had been psychologically attacked by a demon not long ago, something Layla already knew. Roland was quite impressed to learn that this event had occurred. He quickly realized that Almeria wouldn't be easily defeated by an ordinary demon, so the one who attacked her must have been very powerful. Layla giggled before bidding Roland farewell, when disappearing into the bustling city. Excitement filled her as she walked through the crowded streets, impressed by the diversity of races here. Drawn by the enticing aroma from a stall, Layla ordered 2 skewers of grilled meat that an old woman was preparing. However, while waiting for her food, Layla suddenly noticed a strange cloaked figure in the distance. She was pulled back to reality when the old woman asked for payment, but it was only then that Layla discovered her money pouch was gone. She panicked, and her tears began to flow dramatically because her favorite pouch, which Roland had bought for her, had been stolen. Just then, the cloaked figure approached and offered to pay for Layla on the condition that she tell them something. When Layla turned to look, she was stunned to recognize the person under the cloak. Meanwhile, Roland had arrived at the training session location. He entered a building and sat down at a table, listening to talk about today's instructor, a student of the great mage Gilman, a name familiar to Roland. A man walked in, capturing the attention of the entire class, and confidently introduced himself as Samuel, then began his lecture. Roland quickly realized that Samuel's energy didn't match the knowledge he was presenting, as Samuel was only teaching the basics of magic. The person next to Roland asked if he was going to take notes, but Roland simply replied that he could remember everything, which impressed the spiky-haired man. Roland also noticed that many of the employees in the course didn't know much about magic. When Samuel performed a fire magic demonstration, Roland noticed something was wrong and asked for permission to perform his own demonstration. He explained that the magic circle needed to be drawn more simply to reduce the casting time. Roland drew his circle and unleashed a more powerful fire spell. Samuel fell to the floor in shock, while everyone else in the room was amazed and impressed by Roland's skill. Samuel asked who Roland was, and Roland coldly replied to Samuel that it was a question he should answer himself. Samuel was confused until Roland explained that Gilman never took on students, making Samuel immediately feel threatened by Roland's cold gaze. After a few seconds, Roland returned to his normal demeanor, helped Samuel up, and then went back to his seat. Saying that was enough, Samuel returned to the blackboard to continue his lecture, but the entire class had lost focus. Some of the people around Roland started patting him on the shoulder and asked him to show them more of his magic. Everyone was thrilled to see Roland stand up to the instructor, because Samuel always looked down on the staff members in the class, boasting about his position. 3 of them introduced themselves as Roy, Sheila, and Nina, and Roland reluctantly introduced himself back, wondering why he needed to introduce himself to people he would probably never see again. Sheila mentioned that she'd heard Samuel was sponsored by a nobleman, and Roland wondered what it meant to be sponsored. He quickly understood that this usually meant the person had their own private army, or had trained the nobleman's children, or served as their guard. Roy suddenly asked Roland if he was going to get in trouble for speaking out against Samuel, mentioning a colleague who had been threatened and fired for doing the same thing. Roland casually said that he hadn't done anything wrong, but just then, a knight burst into the lecture hall, demanding to know who had mocked Samuel. Roland immediately stood up before the other staff members could warn him. Roland didn't understand why what he did was a problem, until Sheila explained that staying silent was the normal thing to do, making him feel that he had been too careless. He tried to act as if he didn't want to cause trouble, which moved them with his kindness. But the knight urged Roland to hurry up and follow him. When the knight asked for Roland's name, he refused immediately, insisting that a true knight must first observe proper etiquette, which made the knight furious and try to punch Roland. Roland was used to punches like that, so he easily dodged it, but still pretended to be hit, falling to the floor. The knight was confused because he didn't feel the punch connect, but still tried to boast that he had succeeded. Nina rushed over, worried about Roland, who was clutching his right cheek, pretending to be in pain. But he was holding the wrong side until Nina pointed out he'd been punched on his left cheek. Suddenly, the lecture hall window shattered as a majestic and terrifying presence appeared from outside. It was Almaria, with Layla accompanying her, and Almaria was furious, ignoring Layla's pleas for her to calm down. She believed the knight had punched Roland. The knight, completely unaware that Almaria's anger was directed at him, knelt and tried to introduce himself. Roland quickly warned the knight to run, but he didn't understand until Almaria slammed her fist into the ground and demanded that he apologize to Roland. The panicked knight hurriedly apologized, and Roland told him to leave, promising that he would handle the situation. After the knight left, Roland asked Almaria why she was here and whether princesses always had so much free time. Almaria told Roland to be quiet and asked about Layla, saying that Layla had led her here after she asked about him. Roland remembered that Layla had been in her cat form when she and Almaria first met, but he wasn't sure where she was now. Almaria explained that she wanted to have dinner with Roland if he was planning on eating alone, which left Roland stunned. He said that he had told her many times not to let her anger control her, but still thanked her for worrying about him. Almaria smiled shyly and asked if she should wait for him. Roland coldly replied that he was here to work and didn't want to be disturbed, leaving Almaria disappointed as she ran out through the window. When he returned home, Roland recounted the entire story to Layla over dinner, which made the demoness chuckle. Layla remarked that Almaria was very strong, but that she wouldn't have lost if she hadn't been wearing the collar. Roland agreed. Layla also said that Almaria's feelings for Roland seemed closer to love than respect, and wondered why Roland wouldn't accept her. Roland replied that Almaria was still too childish, and that Layla was the closest thing to a perfect woman. This statement took Layla by surprise, and she started to drink more, getting drunk faster. Roland told her to stop drinking, but was interrupted by Samuel at the next table, who was drunk and insulting Roland to the others with him. Samuel drained his cup, boasting about having been taught by Gilman once, while Layla was also finishing her own cup, and started asking Roland when they were going to have children. Finally, Samuel noticed Roland was nearby and challenged him to a duel. However, Layla thought Samuel was talking to her and accepted the challenge. Samuel, captivated by Layla's beauty, asked her to jump into his arms. But Layla suddenly collapsed from drunkenness and accidentally pulled the man's pants down in front of everyone. She then started commenting on how small a certain part of Samuel was. After that, Roland knocked her out, and Roland apologized to the other man for the incident. Roland went to the lecture hall and was talking with his 3 friends from the day before until someone came in and called for him, announcing that Count Zygmus Constantine was asking to see him. Everyone wondered why Zygmus would want to see Roland, figuring it was probably related to the incident with Samuel the day before. Shayla warned Roland to be careful when talking to Zygmus, as there were rumors that anyone who displeased the Count could be beheaded. Roland kept the advice in mind and went to the room where Zygmus was sitting. With a confident smile, Zygmus began to discuss the incident between Roland and Samuel from the previous day, saying that many people thought the facility was teaching ineffective magic. The Count tried to force Roland to apologize to Samuel in front of everyone, but Roland refused. This angered Zygmus, who drew his sword and pointed it at Roland's neck, asking if he had also killed as many people as him. Zygmus, completely unaware of the number of people Roland had killed, boasted that he had killed 16 people and remembered every single detail. Roland simply pinched the blade between two fingers, making it impossible for Zygmus to move. Roland said that Zygmus only heard the voices of the dead because of the hallucinations from his own conscience, and called him a cute, fledgling murderer. Roland noted that Zygmus only killed on impulse, and each kill tormented him, forcing him to escape reality with alcohol. Roland advised Zygmus not to forget the people he had killed, because they would haunt him forever. When Zygmus asked Roland how many people he had killed, Roland simply replied with a question: "How many times have you breathed in your life?" Afterward, Roland told Zygmus to tell Samuel that he was sorry for embarrassing him, but Zygmus changed the subject, asking how much money Roland wanted to join. Roland refused, saying he already liked his current job. Before leaving, Zygmus asked who Roland really was, and Roland just replied that he was merely a guild employee. When Roland returned to their lodgings with Layla, he found her still suffering from a terrible hangover from the night before. After drinking too much the previous night, Layla was still dealing with her hangover. Roland told her they were going home now, which surprised her as she felt like she hadn't had enough fun yet. The black-haired man simply told her she could open a gate anytime she wanted to come back, which quickly calmed Layla down. Suddenly, someone ran up to Roland and announced that the guildmaster, Taro Polo, was requesting to see him. The name was quite familiar to Roland. He told the messenger to tell Taro that he had already left, but the messenger pleaded for Roland to go see him. Roland looked disappointed before agreeing, following the messenger to a specific building and climbing to the top. As they neared the guildmaster's room, the messenger reminded Roland to behave properly in front of him. Roland casually promised he would, but the messenger knew full well Roland had no intention of doing so. He entered the room at the end of the hall, ignoring the messenger's worried words. Taro cheerfully walked over to greet Roland, surprised to see he had actually become a guild employee. Roland guessed that it was Taro who had revealed to Iris that he used to be an assassin. Taro, with an awkward smile, just laughed and apologized. Taro quickly got straight to the point, saying there were two important matters he wanted to discuss with Roland, one of which was about a large-scale mission at the Latte branch, where a massive quest had appeared. When a large-scale quest appears, the nearest adventurers usually rush over immediately to deal with it. However, things always get messy and dangerous, or the quest doesn't get completed, because the adventurers fight over who's in charge. Taro wants to introduce tactical advisors, and Roland was one of the people he had in mind. However, Roland immediately refused and asked why he had to take on this role. Taro explained that was the second thing he wanted to talk about, and asked if Roland knew about the current situation in the demon world. Apparently, there are rumors about the demons discussing the revival of the demon lord, so Taro wants Roland to take command if a large-scale quest occurs. After some convincing, Roland finally agreed, and Taro was delighted, promising to provide more details later. As Roland was about to leave the room, Taro suddenly asked if Roland knew anything about the demon lord's revival. Roland replied that he knew nothing and that the demon lord had already been defeated by the hero's party. After that, Roland left and rode his horse back to his town through a portal. Layla seemed sad, thinking that the rumors about the demon lord might be referring to her. Roland comforted her, saying it could be someone else, which made her feel better. Layla changed the subject and was excited about Roland being promoted to tactical advisor. She wanted to celebrate with some sake. Roland knew this was just an excuse for her to drink again. As Roland thought about why Taro had asked him about the current situation, he realized that the only person who knew he had defeated the demon lord was King Randolph. Layla asked if something was wrong, but Roland said it was nothing, and continued their conversation. She said they should go back to that place for vacation, and Roland replied that she shouldn't lose her wallet next time, causing Layla to complain in frustration as she recalled the incident. The next day, a man named Lenny Conti somehow found his way to Roland's house. He threatened that Roland had to hand over Layla, or he would reveal their secret. This strange man wanted Layla, the demon girl, to add to his slave collection. However, he already knew that Roland would refuse. Lenny asked Roland if he was sure because he knew everything about Layla and their relationship thanks to his clairvoyant skill. Layla warned Lenny not to anger Roland, but he just laughed, not understanding why Roland would be scary. Roland said that although Lenny's clairvoyant skill was powerful, he had relied on it too much. Long story short, Lenny was killed, and the nearby birds ate his corpse. When Roland went to work, Melia asked about Lenny and if he had come to Roland's house, but Roland said he didn't know anything about it, which relieved Melia's worries. Even so, she still found the clairvoyant skill terrifying, and Roland agreed, but also knew that some things are better left a secret. When he got home, Layla brought up how foolish Lenny had been, and said she had never seen Roland that angry. She wondered if he was worried that Lenny would take her away. Roland wanted to drop the subject, but he admitted that if Layla were captured, it would be a huge pain. Layla hugged Roland tightly and spoke an ancient demon word, which means may your happiness never end. Roland kissed her hand and returned the sentiment, making Layla blush. She was about to kiss Roland, but he pulled away, leaving her confused. Roland went outside because someone was at the door. It was the former slaves of Lenny, the man Roland had killed. They came to thank Roland for rescuing them, but they didn't know how to express their gratitude, so they offered to help with anything he needed. He asked them if they wanted to try becoming adventurers, and none of them refused, so he and Layla helped them get cleaned up, and Layla also prepared a meal for them. The girls thanked her, and one of them told Roland that even if he hadn't helped, someone else would have, sooner or later. Finally, the girls asked if Roland could give them names. But Layla quickly jumped in and named them Iru, Lian, Sansu, and Su. They thanked the demoness and called her a married woman, which made Layla very happy. Roland decided to let the girls stay with them for a while and assured them that they would never be treated cruelly again. Even so, he was worried about whether they could pass the adventurer exam. Surprisingly, they all passed. Iru had poor combat skills, but a gift for magic. Lian was the opposite, with beast-like traits that made her well-suited as a scout. Sansu possessed the superior strength of a dwarf, while Su, an elf, was skilled in both magic and archery. Roland wondered why Lenny had enslaved these 4 girls, but he knew that with the right training, they would improve quickly. He wanted them to form a party, but the 4 girls argued over who would be the leader. In the end, they decided with a game of rock, paper, scissors, and Iru won. Once things were settled, Roland told them to accept quests at the counter and to come to him if they had any questions, and the girls excitedly agreed. The next day, they had already completed several quests, the most recent being to guard a field. Roland wondered why they took such a boring quest, when they could have chosen more interesting ones with better rewards. However, the girls didn't seem dissatisfied at all. Instead, they completed it cheerfully and were eager for more. Roland asked Sue if anything was wrong, as she seemed quieter than usual, but she denied it, and Roland went on to find another quest. Everyone in the guild was whispering about the relationship between Roland and the girls, coming up with wild theories just because they addressed him respectfully. Finally, Roland gave them a quest to gather antidote herbs, a task with no limit on how many they could bring back, and they quickly set off. Melia was impressed that Roland had given them another quest. He knew that if he kept giving them small quests, they'd get bored. However, the girl asked what he was going to do with the other quest Iris had assigned. Luckily, Nell and his party walked in, and Roland knew they were the perfect people for the job. When the girls completed the quest and received a huge sum of money, they were astonished and invited Roland out to celebrate. They fought over who would get to sit next to him, but Melia distracted them with the idea of buying cute outfits to surprise Roland, causing them to immediately dash for the door. Sue stayed behind for a moment, intending to ask why Roland had given them a quest with such a high reward, but in the end she decided to just thank him and left. Melia teased that Roland's cover had been blown and reminded him to finish his work before the girls got back, and he agreed. Meanwhile, Nell and his party were on the sewer cleaning quest the girls were supposed to have done earlier. Nell's teammate complained about the smell, but Nell told him to stop whining, as it was a quest from Roland and they shouldn't let success get to their heads. Another workday brought unexpected situations for Roland. A staff member called him over to meet someone who wanted to become an adventurer. The person hadn't written down their reason for joining. When she pulled down her hood, her beauty stunned everyone in the guild. She introduced herself as Candy Meinert. Roland was unfazed by her appearance and asked for her reason for becoming an adventurer. Candy replied that there was no need to explain, as it was obvious she needed money. Roland took out a crystal to measure Candy's magical power. The crystal glowed brightly, creating a gentle breeze that blew through Candy's clothes and hair. When it was done, the crystal made a crackling sound, and everyone in the guild gasped in awe. Roland stated that Candy's power level was 1,000, equivalent to a C rank. Candy giggled, surprised, and called it amazing. Some kind of energy emanated from her, enchanting the male staff members, while Roland remained unaffected. 2 male employees fell to their knees, while the female staff looked on with disgust. Roland noted that she had excellent magical capacity, but he still required her to take a practical test. Candy hesitated for a moment, but then agreed. They both stepped outside, and Roland told her to attack him without holding back. Candy created a magic circle and summoned a staff from the ground. She smirked, asking if Roland was scared. But he just calmly told her to come at him. Candy got angry, swinging her staff to attack. But Roland easily dodged and appeared behind her. She tried to use her charm magic on him, but Roland quickly dispelled it. Candy fell to the ground, bewildered, and looked up at him in confusion. Candy asked Roland how he knew about her identity, but he just smiled and said it was a secret. After returning to the guild, Roland told her she had passed the test and was now considered an adventurer, able to take on quests starting the next day. However, Candy seemed drawn to the fact that there was a man stronger than her, while all the other men in the guild were trying to ask her to dinner, form a party, or even propose. Candy rejected them all and declared that she already had plans with Roland that evening, surprising everyone, as she left with him for a secret location. Finally, they arrived at Roland's house, which confused Candy, who asked if it was a restaurant. Roland laughed and corrected her, saying it was his home. Just then, Layla walked up, greeted Roland, and asked if he wanted to take a bath with her. Roland just chuckled and told her to greet him more normally, but Layla just laughed, saying he'd never corrected her before. Suddenly, Candy recognized Layla and called out her name. Layla recognized Candy too, calling her Dee. Layla threw her arms around her, overjoyed to know Candy was still alive after thinking she'd been killed by the hero. Candy almost thought this was an imposter, but there was no way. She was still confused as to why Layla no longer had any magic. Layla explained that she was officially dead to the public due to certain circumstances and invited Candy inside for dinner. Candy, whose real name was Candace Meinrad, was a vampire who once belonged to the Demon Lord's army, something Roland had realized early on. He explained the traits that had helped him figure it out, especially from his memories of the Great War. Layla asked Candy why she became an adventurer, and she replied that it was to earn money and hide her identity, but Candy added that she wasn't being forced and was just trying to have some fun. Layla laughed and asked if this fun involved using her demonic eyes to control men. Candy didn't hesitate to confirm it, saying it was for self-defense. Roland, knowing that wasn't entirely true, brought up how Candy had tried to use her eyes during the practical exam. Candy just laughed and said it was because he was too strong. Their exchange made Layla jealous, and she warned Candy that she couldn't use her demonic eyes on Roland. Candy was surprised at how Layla had become a completely different woman from her former lonely self, which flustered Layla. Roland changed the subject and asked Candy if she planned to live as an adventurer, and Candy confirmed that was her plan. Layla offered to let Candy stay at their house until she earned enough money for her next journey. That evening, while Roland was washing dishes with Candy, he asked if she was okay with not drinking blood for so long. Candy just teased him, implying that maybe he was more concerned about her than he let on. Roland was just curious as Candy explained that her life was like an emotional roller coaster, with the terrible feeling of prolonged hunger and the euphoria of satisfying it by drinking blood. He asked if she wanted to drink his blood, which left Candy stunned and flustered, saying that Layla would scold her if she did. Roland just smiled, saying that Layla usually takes long baths. The next day, Candy was frustrated that trying to complete enough quests to earn a living on her own was so difficult. Roland explained that everyone starts at a low rank, and the rewards correspond to their level, which disappointed Candy. However, he said they should look for more quests and that he was always ready to listen to any of her requests. Candy shared that she wasn't good with sunlight, and although she could use fire protection magic to lessen the effects, she still preferred quests that didn't take place in the sun. Roland went to find a high-reward quest for Candy that took place at night, but was interrupted when Iris approached and handed him a letter. As Iris left, Melia let out a sigh, prompting Roland to ask what was wrong. Melia explained that quests nearing their deadlines were piling up, most of them being night quests or strange requests with high rewards. And she felt stuck because no one was taking them. Roland asked what would happen if a quest went past its deadline, and Melia explained that the guild would have to report to the client that no one took the job, and usually adjust the reward or rank. However, if this happened too often, the public's trust in the guild would decline. Melia felt like she had to give up on all the quests. But Roland reassured her that there was no need to worry, because he had the perfect person for the job. After some time, thanks to Candy's help, the backlog of quests was gradually completed, easing the pressure on the guild. Some of the guild staff wondered what had happened to the recent requests, the ones that were about to be cancelled, only to discover that Candy herself had completed them. Everyone was impressed and full of admiration. While Roland was talking with Candy and processing more quests for her, Candy heard about how she was being recognized for her talent, but knew there was one quest where she'd need Rosie's help because she didn't like bugs. Candy noticed Roland had a good reputation and said she would try not to embarrass him. But Roland told her not to worry and gave her a few more quests she could complete at night. She left to do the quests while Roland continued his busy workday, handling more requests for adventurers. Iris came over and handed Roland another letter from the same sender as before, this being the second one. While Roland was reading the letter, Nell and his party suddenly entered the guild and greeted Roland, asking if there were any good quests he could recommend. Roland was silent for a moment, then told them they'd come at the perfect time and that he had a favor to ask, which made them worry they were going to be assigned to clean the sewers again like last time. Sometime later, Candy had completed enough quests to feel she could be independent and move out of Roland and Layla's house. Roland asked if she was sure she wanted to do that, since they really didn't mind her staying. But Candy explained that she'd found an affordable inn and had enough money. Besides, she was also feeling another hunger that she couldn't suppress if she stayed close to Roland, and Layla certainly wouldn't want that to happen. Roland was impressed by Candy's loyalty, but she said that having someone like Layla was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Just before Candy left, Layla ran out and gave her a homemade lunchbox, making Candy joke that Rosie would be jealous. She left, and Roland asked Layla how Candy controlled her bloodlust. Layla explained that Candy used to receive small amounts of blood from human prisoners, but Candy had said that human blood was too delicious to just have a little. Roland started to worry if he needed to be more careful around Candy, but Layla reassured him there was nothing to worry about. However, when Candy returned to the guild for more quests, Roland noticed something was off about her. She seemed more reserved, seemed to forget things, and appeared tired. Roland advised her not to push herself too hard, or else Layla would worry, but Candy tried to fix her attitude and said there was nothing to worry about. Everyone in the guild admired Candy as she walked out, while Nell and his party came in to report to Roland on what they had heard and discovered. Roland felt he needed to investigate further himself, and discovered that Candy hadn't seemed to be staying at any of the nearby inns for the past few days. This led him to start investigating the worst-case scenario, related to the 2 letters he had received from Sir Bardell. The letters from Sir Bardell mentioned several missing adventurers, which had Bardell worried about so many people disappearing in such a short period. Roland felt uneasy, hoping that these disappearances weren't related to Candy. As he approached a large mansion, he saw Candy standing outside, the place Nell and his party had mentioned, saying a woman had been coming here for the past few days, making Roland wonder if she lived here. He entered the mansion and saw Candy walk into a room, from which he could hear painful screams echoing out. Roland quickly broke down the door to a nearby room, only to discover that it was an old torture chamber. Among them were corpses, mutilated beyond recognition. Roland saw a locked door, thinking someone might be held captive behind it. Suddenly, Candy appeared and tried to attack him, but Roland realized something was wrong. He immediately slammed her to the ground and broke the hypnosis spell that had been cast on her. Candy woke up confused, asking Roland what had happened, but he had the same question for her because Candy had no memory of anything since one of her last missions. Roland went to the locked door and opened it, confirming that the kidnapped adventurers were being held behind it. Just as he was about to free them, a man appeared with his bodyguards asking who Roland was. Roland calmly introduced himself and explained that he had followed Candy to find out why she was acting strangely, which led him to this mansion. The short man said that he would have to file a complaint with the guild about this incident, but Roland quickly reminded him that the Lord himself had asked him to investigate the missing adventurers. Roland then asked why people were being held captive in the room. The man tried to blame Candy, claiming she had used her demonic eyes to seduce him and force him to do terrible things. Roland realized this man had been in the war and might know Candy's true identity. Roland asked if a vampire's bloodlust would be strong enough to break a hypnosis spell, causing the man to nearly slip up. Candy interrupted the conversation and asked what was going on, and Roland explained that this man had used her vampire identity to hide his own pleasure in torturing others. Hearing this, Candy became furious at the thought that she might have drunk the blood of an unworthy stranger. She summoned her magical power, saying that vampires are proud creatures who carefully choose who is worthy of becoming a part of them. She quickly killed all the surrounding bodyguards. The man tried to use his magic against her, but Roland immediately punched him in the face. The man panicked, asking if Roland wanted to make an enemy of the Dalton family. But Roland didn't care, and said he would report the incident to King Randolph. The short man was confused, not understanding the relationship between Roland and the king. Candy felt insulted on Roland's behalf, but Roland calmly said he still needed to teach this man a lesson. Roland ordered the man to lie on the bed in the torture room, and the man began to cry and beg frantically. Candy asked the man what he had done to the people who had begged before being tortured. Roland grabbed his hair, dragged him towards the table, and said that he wouldn't get an easy death. In the end, they killed the man behind the disappearances and brought a sack containing his body to Sir Bardell. When Roland began to explain that he wanted a healer on site to intervene, Bardell cut him off, saying the man deserved to die. However, Roland continued, explaining that he had intended to have the healer restore the man, only to injure him again and again. Everyone in the room fell silent for a moment, sensing the gravity of the situation. Sir Bardell thanked Roland for helping to solve the case, assuming the horrible experiences from the last Great War had made the man that way. But that was no excuse for his cruel behavior. Roland still decided to report the incident to the Dalton family, believing they would understand once they saw the crime scene. Bardell tried to give Roland a reward, but he refused and asked to leave. On the way back, Candy wondered why Roland refused the reward, and he explained that he didn't do it for the money. Roland then asked Candy how someone as strong as her could be hypnotized by such an insignificant man. Candy, embarrassed, explained that vampires become weak in the sunlight, especially against magic. Roland recalled that during the Great War, vampires only appeared at night, and the fire guard spell only helped them move under the sun, but it couldn't protect them completely. Candy admitted this was the first time she had revealed this to a human, and Roland promised to keep it a secret. As they were returning home, Candy realized that the man might not have known she was a vampire. He hypnotized her simply because she was a beautiful woman. Roland gently tapped her on the head, telling her not to underestimate humans, and not to make him worry. Candy joked, saying that if Roland kept caring for her like that, she would actually get serious about him. Finally, when they arrived home, Candy thanked Roland for saving her from having to drink the blood of such a disgusting man. She confessed that drinking someone's blood is almost like an act of intimacy, which made her both embarrassed and furious that she almost did it with someone she considered so inferior. Candy thanked him again, but Roland didn't think it was a big deal. However, it was different for Candy. She began to understand why Layla loved Roland, and slowly she started to feel the same way. She hugged Roland and bit his neck, but without drawing blood. Roland was confused but didn't resist, and Candy explained that it was a sign of a marriage proposal, a deliberate act to show that she cherished him. Candy expressed her deep love for Roland from the bottom of her heart. She drew her own blood and offered it to him, to officially bind herself to him. Roland accepted without hesitation, moving Candy to tears of happiness. They shared a kiss and held each other in a moment of bliss. However, someone had witnessed the scene and asked what was going on. It was Layla. Roland quickly made an excuse, saying it was just part of her ritual. But Layla, suppressing her anger, yelled that she didn't believe him. After a tense moment, Roland and Candy managed to calm Layla down and put the female vampire to sleep to de-escalate the situation. Roland tried to explain further, but Layla told him not to because she could smell the blood on him and had already figured out what happened. Roland held her face in his hands, causing Layla to blush and step back in surprise. When he told her she didn't have to wait for him, Layla gently replied that she did it because she wanted to, even though she hadn't expected to see that. Still, she was glad he was safe, and she welcomed him back with a gentle gaze. Layla kissed Roland as the sun began to rise. It was a new workday at Roland's guild, but today was a little different. The guild was bustling with adventurers, and the staff all seemed on edge. Roland was confused by the scene, while Melia explained that 3 staff members had arrived from headquarters. Making Roland wonder if something was wrong, Morley chimed in, scoffing at them and telling them not to slack off. Everyone returned to their counters to continue helping adventurers with their requests. At first it seemed like just another normal day, but Roland could feel that something was off. Everything seemed fine at the guild, even with the occasional argument breaking out. However, 2 people started bickering and brought magic into it, ignoring everyone around them. Roland sensed trouble and called out to Melia, just as sparks began to fly through the air. Before anyone could figure out what was happening, the building exploded. Everyone either stood watching in shock or fled in chaos. Staff and adventurers scrambled to escape from the rubble. Roland made sure Melia was safe after the explosion, while other adventurers used healing magic to help the injured, or gossiped about the argument between the two who caused the incident. Melia figured it was a lover's quarrel, but Roland thought it was more complicated than that, and that the explosion was just a diversion. He couldn't believe two adults would cause such a scene just over an affair. Roland continued to think deeper about the real purpose behind this incident. Roland quickly deduced that the explosion might be an act of terrorism and was about to run off to catch the culprits, but the two who caused it had already taken responsibility and apologized. Iris came out looking bewildered by the chaotic scene. While Melia and Roland decided to leave the matter to the branch manager, the manager gave the couple a stern warning despite the severity of the incident. However, no matter the punishment, the guild still had to close temporarily for repairs. Iris recalled that there were representatives from headquarters who had visited and given the guild a large sum of money. Many thought that money would be used for repair costs, but Iris suggested using the money to organize a resort trip for the staff. Everyone agreed and excitedly set off for the destination. Melia happily leaned out of the carriage window, prompting Iris to remind her that it was dangerous. Melia apologized while Layla was annoyed by the girl's excitement. Roland turned to Layla and asked if she'd forgotten her wallet in her excitement for the trip, which silenced the demoness. Iris was surprised to see Roland on the trip, but he explained he was only going because Layla wanted to. Layla immediately started teasing him, asking why he was in a carriage full of women. Roland just replied that it was a coincidence because he was so popular, and that he was living a completely normal life. Something Layla still didn't quite understand. Melia curiously asked what Roland was muttering about, but he ignored her. She went on to say that she had brought her swimsuit, which made all the other girls in the carriage complain that they hadn't brought theirs. Iris started checking a list of shops with a flustered look, while Layla asked in surprise about the swimsuits, making Roland wonder if swimsuits even existed in the demon world. After a long journey, everyone arrived at their lodging and went into her room. Layla happily returned to her human form, flopping onto the bed blissfully. Melia walked in and was surprised to see Layla there, since she wasn't a guild employee, which made Melia even more curious. Layla told Melia not to worry about the details, then she jumped off the bed and dragged Melia along to go buy swimsuits. Roland apologized and asked Melia to keep an eye on Layla, leaving Melia with no choice but to agree. They left, and afterward, Candy entered the room, complaining about Roland overworking her. Roland asked Candy about any findings related to drugs in the area recently. Candy hugged Roland and lay in his arms as she explained her findings. A drug called Second was becoming popular in the red light district, offering temporary pleasure but causing severe addiction. Roland realized how serious the situation was. As Candy had been scouting the area for a few days and had found a suspicious shop, Roland wanted Candy to take him there, and this investigation had started after he received a letter from Elvie, which mentioned a drug circulating in a region of her country. While investigating, Roland and Candy passed by an alley, where they suddenly saw a man talking to Melia. The man was telling Melia she could earn a lot of money by working at their shop. Both Candy and Roland recognized Melia, and Roland wondered where Layla had gone. Candy explained to Roland that the man talking to Melia was the one many people had identified as the drug supplier. Roland headed into the alley and told Candy to go find Layla, while the strange man tried to pull Melia in a certain direction. Roland quickly rushed in and subdued the man. Melia was surprised to see Roland appear, but he warned her that if she continued to follow this man, something terrible would happen. Melia was stunned by Roland's words, but she ultimately listened and returned to the inn as he had told her to. Roland looked down at the freckled man and immediately asked about the drug, but the stranger pretended to know nothing. Until Roland broke one of his fingers, causing him to scream. Roland asked again, and threatened to break another finger. Finally, the man gave in and confessed that he was instructed to find beautiful women and give them the distributed drug. Roland initially thought he was the only one distributing the drug, but the man revealed that there were 3 others involved. When the man asked why Roland was making such a big deal about it, those words enraged Roland. He grabbed the man by the collar and said that this drug was a poison, rotting people's bodies and minds, making them forget themselves and unable to live without it. The people affected included the stranger's own friends, family, and even his lover. Hearing this, the man was surprised and stunned, and then revealed that his boss was a sharp-eyed, red-haired man who occasionally visited the shop. The man agreed to lead Roland to the shop, and on the way, he explained that his boss usually came to the shop twice a week to restock the drugs, and that the drug was likely stored in a warehouse in Kotka. He also said that many women had become addicted to the drug. Finally, they arrived at the shop, and Roland was satisfied with what he had found. He told the man to destroy the drugs after leaving the shop, and he agreed immediately, surprised to realize his finger was no longer broken. Afterward, Roland proceeded to investigate the area, and found a gate behind the building. He recalled what Rosie had said and, suspecting that the creator of this portal might have power equal to or greater than Rosie's, Roland stepped through the portal and found himself on a hill near a mansion. It belonged to a man called Baron Marty Kucera. The guards demanded that he leave. He was surprised to find that a feudal lord was involved in this. Roland used his assassin skills to sneak past the guards, and easily climbed to the third floor of the mansion. When Roland appeared on the balcony, Baron Marty Kucera was surprised, and asked him who he was. Roland made up a story that he was a guest, but it was obviously a lie. The Baron tried to call the guards, but Roland continued his lie, saying that he was from the Farron Kingdom's special public security team, investigating the strange drug. The Baron tried to argue, saying he could do whatever he wanted in his own territory, but Roland reminded him that this land belonged to the kingdom. Marty Kucera insisted that the common people exist only to serve the interests of their lord. He drew his sword and screamed that he was the law. Roland dodged the attack and sarcastically called him a pig, before taking him down and telling him to learn how to be a decent person. Afterward, Roland brought the Baron before King Randolph to explain the situation. King Randolph was completely unaware of this drug. As a result, the drug was banned throughout the entire Farron Kingdom, and those who produced, distributed, or used it would be punished. The punishment for Baron Marty Kucera was the stripping of his title, territory, and assets. As he was being led away, Roland spoke up, asking to question him further about who was behind the drug's production. Roland already knew that demons were involved, but he still wanted to learn more about the origin of this dangerous drug. Roland was busy interrogating Baron Marty Kucera. The Baron, in a panic, started screaming that he was going to be killed. Hearing Marty's screams, he wondered if something even more terrible was behind this case. Earlier, Layla and Melia were together, walking through the bustling markets of the place they were staying. Melia wondered what style Layla would prefer, knowing that Layla didn't know about swimsuits. Layla asked in confusion why everyone wasn't naked. Melia got flustered and told Layla that being naked was indecent and not allowed. Layla still tried to argue that people could just take off their clothes when they were in the water, since no one would see them then. She was surprised. She said that young ladies all wear cute clothes and that they dream of wearing outfits like these in front of the person they like. They went into the shop together, and Melia showed Layla everything around them. She asked if Layla thought the swimsuit was cute, and Layla said it wasn't bad. Layla said she would pick something out for herself. Melia wasn't against the idea. She felt as if anything would suit Layla, because of her enviable beauty. However, Layla noticed someone in the distance, far from them in the crowd, and she started running after them before Melia could realize where she was going. The two of them began to get separated. Layla kept chasing the mysterious man, whose coat was dangling from his shoulders. She continued to follow him until he stopped in front of a warehouse. She debated whether or not to call out to him. She didn't want to be mistaken and end up embarrassed for following the man without getting a clear look at his face. Layla saw the man enter the warehouse. Layla stood confused in front of the warehouse door, trying and failing to open it. She peered through the window with a frustrated look, when Candy, the vampire, suddenly appeared from behind. Candy said that Roland was looking for Layla, but Layla couldn't leave because she was convinced she had seen her brother Luther go into the building. Candy glanced inside the building. Layla felt the situation worsening as she realized Luther was involved. She asked Candy what was inside the warehouse, but before Candy could explain, Luther, whom they believed to be dead, walked out and greeted them with a smirk. Layla was excited to see her brother, but Luther wondered if she was really his sister since he couldn't sense any demonic power from her. Layla replied that she would explain later. Candy stepped forward and asked Luther what he was doing at the warehouse, but he just glared at her with eyes full of hatred and unleashed a wave of energy that weakened Candy. Luther told Candy to get lost, while Layla tried to convince him to return to the demon world, but Luther scoffed that the world was too boring and said that he could be his true self in the human world, where the food was delicious and the women were beautiful, and he didn't have to compare himself to other geniuses. Luther asked Candy what she knew, but the vampire just feigned ignorance. Luther continued, saying that the demon lord was dead, because no demon lord could exist without demonic power. Candy realized how serious the situation was and told Layla to run, because everyone in the army knew that Luther had always hated Layla's very existence. Luther declared that the Layla before him was just an imposter and activated his power. Candy tried to protect Layla, but she was stabbed through the stomach in an instant. Layla stared at the scene before her, stunned, and unable to believe what had just happened. Luther knelt before Layla and confessed that he had always hated her, but now he was thrilled that she was nothing more than a weakling. Luther tried to kill Layla, but she didn't even flinch. Believing that Roland would arrive in time, just then Roland appeared, kicking Luther away. Roland called Luther a weakling, but Luther confidently retorted that Roland was just an insignificant human. Layla explained that Luther was her brother, and Roland realized he was one of the commanders of the demon army. Roland declared that he had changed his mind and no longer intended to capture Luther alive, but was ready to kill him instead. Layla was surprised and looked at Roland quietly with a sad expression. Roland tried to get more information about the drug from Luther, but he refused to talk and attacked Roland. Roland, with his experience as an assassin, easily dodged and recognized Luther's technique. However, he also saw that Luther was lacking in every skill, and asked if Luther only knew how to bully the weak. While fighting, Roland could easily chat with Luther, something Luther couldn't do when facing his own sister. This astonished Luther, to see a human capable of using the same fighting technique as him. Roland warned Luther not to underestimate humans. Layla approached her brother and explained that it was Roland who had defeated her, leaving Luther confused as to why she would side with a human, calling her a disgrace to the demon race. Roland punched Luther again and said that even after their fight, Layla was still worried about her subordinates. Layla agreed that she was indeed a disgrace, because she had fallen in love with Roland. Hearing this, Luther became even more convinced that Layla was unworthy of being the demon lord. She tried to explain that the differences between races didn't matter, but that only made Luther angrier, as he believed she had no right to say that after so many of their comrades had died for her. Layla admitted her mistakes, recalling that in the past, there were many bloodthirsty factions she had tried to avoid confronting, and that was one of the reasons she started the war. Responsibility is one of the duties of a demon lord, but in the end, she grew tired of it all, until she met Roland, who gave her a chance to change. Luther wondered just how strong Roland was to have changed Layla so much. Before deciding to lie down in defeat, and saying that the situation was boring, Roland agreed and quickly finished Luther off. Afterward, Roland and Layla left, with Roland carrying Candy in his arms. He asked Layla about soul magic, a type of magic forbidden in the demon world because of the burden it places on the caster. Roland didn't care about the risks, as he was determined to revive Candy at any cost. Layla hoped that he would succeed, because she didn't want him to die. They entered the forest and laid Candy's body down on the grass. Roland began to use soul magic on the female vampire. A brilliant light enveloped everything, and pieces of Roland's skin began to peel off and fly from his body, a sign that the magic was consuming him. Layla screamed Roland's name as everything turned white, and Roland seemed to have just woken up. He stretched, complaining that his body felt heavy, which made Layla angrily say that it was normal since he had used high-level magic. Roland didn't see it as a big deal since only 2 days had passed, and he asked about the time she had used soul magic before. Layla admitted that she had used it once in the past to save her pet, Ortenberg. She complained about Roland's condition and told him he needed more rest, but Roland was still determined to find who was distributing the drug. Layla mentioned the drug Second, a painkiller from the demon world, which used to be a powder before being turned into a liquid. She explained that it doesn't harm demons, but it seems to have side effects on humans. Layla wondered how Luther knew all of this. Just then, Candy entered the room, explaining that she felt completely healthy thanks to Roland. Candy was also surprised to realize her bloodlust had vanished, which she found quite convenient. Then, she urged Roland to hurry up and take action, which confused him as it seemed Layla was hiding something from him. Roland was taken to the beach where everyone was in swimsuits, and Layla complained that she couldn't be naked. Everyone welcomed Roland and was happy that he had recovered, and they all started chatting with each other. When they saw Roland stretching, everyone wondered why. He just calmly said that he was going to swim to the island on the other side. The girls were surprised by his intention, but Roland had made up his mind, and they couldn't stop him. The girls then convinced Layla to drop her towel so she could join in the fun with them. Finally, Layla took off her towel and went to have fun with everyone, while Roland did a few swimming laps. The day passed quickly, and when everyone was exhausted, Candy asked about Iris and Melia. Roland explained that they were preparing a barbecue. Suddenly, a crowd gathered around and said that an elf had washed ashore, and they realized it was Rosie. Surprisingly, Rosie had been in the sea, and everyone decided to just let it go and join Iris and Melia for the barbecue. That evening, Melia tried to ask Roland about Layla, and Roland said that Layla had gone shopping This excited Melia, and she suggested they go for a walk together, and Roland agreed. Melia told him to meet her in 30 minutes, then left excitedly while Roland got ready and checked how much money he had. Candy came in and asked if he was free in the evening. Roland hesitated for a moment before agreeing. Candy invited him to the rocky coastal area to have some fun, without explaining any further, and then left. After that, Iris came in and was disappointed to learn that Melia had already asked Roland for a walk. But Roland thanked Iris for the previous day and was glad that Layla and Candy were happy too. Iris sighed about how she was always surrounded by beautiful girls, then adjusted Roland's shirt and told him not to overwork himself. They both left the room, and Iris said she was going to check on the branch's work in their area since she had just received some information. When he met up with Melia again, they went for a walk together. She happily said that it felt like they were on a date. Roland realized the reason she had invited him, and they went to have lunch at a seafood restaurant. Roland remembered his promise to Candy and said he needed to use the restroom. He quickly ran out to the shore, jumped down, and met up with Candy. She sighed, having waited for a long time, but Roland pretended he had been there the whole time. They started fishing, and when Roland wondered if it really took two people to fish, Candy said they could have fun while they waited. However, Roland didn't have much time. He decided to jump into the water, using the shadows to pull on the fishing rod, which confused Candy about the fish. After that, Roland quickly returned to the restaurant, where Melia was surprised to see him soaking wet. He made up a story, saying it was because of a stomachache, and told them they should just focus on eating. When they finished eating, Roland was again called for help by two small shadows. He told Melia he had to go again, making her wonder if she should get him some medicine. He said he would get it himself. He hurriedly left to buy a big fish and then returned to the shore. He tied the fish to the fishing line, and Candy pulled it up, confused, because the fish was already dead. Roland convinced her that the fish had just exhausted itself, and Candy suggested they have dinner together. However, he apologized and said he already had other plans. When he got back to the restaurant, Melia was again surprised to see seaweed stuck in his hair, but they continued eating and left the restaurant. Melia was happy that Roland's stomachache was gone, and was about to ask what else they could do, but Roland saw Layla in the distance. He quickly said goodbye to Melia, promising he'd make it up to her once he recovered, which made her smile happily. Roland then went over to Layla, who was enjoying a moment alone with her own private joy. Roland gave Layla a gift, and she quickly snatched it, pinning it in her hair. He complimented her, and Layla's mood immediately brightened, not questioning why the gift was wet. Layla said she wanted to treat him to dinner as a thank you, and found a nice seafood restaurant. Roland thought she wanted to go to the restaurant he had visited with Melia, but Layla pulled him in another direction, saying they would go for a walk, just the two of them, for a while. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Rosie lay in bed, whispering incomprehensible things, while the nurses reported that she was constantly having nightmares and felt as if she had been abandoned. The next day, after dinner and a pleasant time together, Roland and Layla were lying in bed. She pointed to the scar on Roland's stomach, surprised that she hadn't noticed it at the beach, wondering how even someone like him could get hurt. Roland agreed, saying he had many other scars, and turned over to reveal the scars on his back. Layla was curious why there was only one scar on the front of his body. Her eyes filled with anticipation. But Roland simply said it wasn't an interesting story, that he was just inexperienced when he got injured. Layla was taken aback by his refusal and almost felt disappointed. Afterward, Roland got ready for the day's work and went to the guild. There, he met a D-rank adventurer named Sasha Grid, who was asking for a quest with a high reward. Roland found a protection quest on the old road, where the main bridge had been destroyed by heavy rains. This road was very narrow and had a lot of traffic, and needed to be guarded until the bridge could be repaired. Sasha decided to try the quest for a day to see if it suited her. Not long after, a messenger on horseback arrived at the guild, announcing that a giant demon bird, a gatehawk, had appeared on the old road, and the adventurers on site couldn't handle it. The guild staff descended into chaos, worrying about how to handle the situation and what to do to send an urgent request to Lord Bartel. They decided to classify this quest as B rank, and would need to seek help from other guilds. Iris walked in and ordered everyone to calm down, then went straight to Roland, asking him to take charge of the situation, as the safety of the people on the old road was the top priority. Roland accepted the quest without hesitation, borrowed the messenger's horse, and rushed off. While everyone in the guild asked in surprise if he was really going empty-handed, Roland simply said that all he needed was his own body, leaving everyone stunned by his composure and decisiveness. On his way, he recalled the scars on his body. He rode the horse as fast as he could. Roland knew that gatehawks were dangerous, man-eating demon birds that usually lived in the mountains, so encountering one on the old road wasn't strange. But this risk hadn't been included in the original quest. He knew that a giant gatehawk could swallow an adult whole, and that he needed to act fast. Finally, Roland came across a group of adventurers calling for help, talking about the demon bird they had encountered. Roland asked them if they knew Sasha, and was then told that she was up ahead, trying to deal with the bird. Although the adventurers tried to warn him, Roland continued on, confident in his skills. When he arrived, Roland saw Sasha struggling against the giant gatehawk, while other adventurers lay motionless on the ground surrounded by pools of blood. Sasha kept firing arrows at the demon bird, but it was unfazed. Just as Roland saw that Sasha was about to be attacked by the gatehawk, she fell to the ground and screamed in fear, thinking her end had come. But that didn't happen. When she opened her eyes, Roland was standing right in front of her, throwing a rock at the gatehawk to throw it off course. He quickly jumped up and plunged his sword straight into the monster's head, finishing it off. Sasha rushed over to thank Roland, though she felt disappointed that she couldn't handle the giant monster on her own. Looking closer, she noticed Roland's glasses were broken, and that he looked completely different without them. This was the second time he had saved her, but Roland tried to deny it, saying she was mistaken. Afterward, he returned to the guild to report the situation, while Sasha stayed behind to wait for the rescue team. He was surprised that she still remembered him. When Roland got back to the guild, he heard the staff members reenacting the events from before he left, praising his bravery. Sasha looked around and realized he had a good reputation at the guild, and that the adventurers in the city all spoke well of him. Roland responded humbly that he felt honored to be spoken of so positively, but Sasha frowned, feeling like he didn't really mean what he said. Roland looked for a quest for Sasha, but there were no suitable D-rank quests. In the end, he suggested an E-rank quest to gather gooseberries, an ingredient for recovery potions. Paying no attention to what he was saying, she was focused on how truly different Roland looked with his glasses on. Sasha wondered why he would lie to her, but he insisted he wasn't lying. He said he only wore the glasses for fashion, which made her laugh at his answer. He assigned Sasha the quest, and she accepted it, and Roland reminded her that if she ran into any unexpected monsters, she should run away immediately. Sasha felt he was being overly worried, but Roland simply replied that he only gives that advice to people who are prone to doing reckless things or are likely to fail. Cutting the conversation short, Roland said that other people were waiting their turn. She left, saying she would complete the quest. After Sasha left, Melia came over to ask Roland about her. Melia quickly suggested that Sasha might be a stalker, which he didn't believe, but Melia kept insisting on it. Roland, though confused, just continued with his work. Melia sighed and said it must be nice to have a normal life. The word normal caught Roland's attention, so he stared at her as she asked if she was overreacting. Melia hated rushing things and would get flustered by it. She planned to go to Roland's house to teach Layla how to cook. After the girl left, Roland thought about what she had said. At the end of the day, the guild staff were cleaning up, ready to close for the day. Melia approached Roland and asked why he'd been staring outside for so long. He said he was waiting for Sasha. Roland felt worried since Sasha hadn't returned from her quest yet, and he decided to go look for her. When he arrived at the forest, Roland discovered two men who had knocked Sasha unconscious and had bad intentions for her. He quickly intervened, burning the two men's butts with a flaming stick, and threatening to do something much worse if they didn't get lost. After the two men ran off in a panic, Roland lifted the still unconscious Sasha onto his horse and headed back to the city. When Sasha woke up, she was surprised to find herself being carried by Roland, but he didn't tell her the truth, only saying that she had fainted in the forest. Sasha felt grateful and said this was the third time he had saved her. But Roland corrected her, saying it was the second time. Roland told her she should go to the hospital if she didn't feel well. Then he started to leave, but she managed to grab his shirt. Sasha hesitated, wanting to thank Roland in a special way for saving her. But Roland brushed it off, telling her not to misunderstand the situation. Arriving home, Roland was greeted by Layla, and she noticed that something seemed to be bothering him. Layla asked him what was wrong, since he'd been gone for days. She teased him, asking if Iris had been giving him a hard time. She hugged him and said she was ready to listen to his story. Roland sighed and said it wasn't a happy story. As he took off his glasses, he admitted the scar on his stomach was from his third mission as an assassin. In the past, he still remembered every detail of the assassination and knew he had to finish before dawn. His boss, Amy, insisted he would do well, telling him to always be wary of the unexpected and adapt to the situation. He never forgot what she told him. In their line of work, you always had to be ready for anything and remain secretive. Roland prepared to carry out the assassination, but he gave himself away and couldn't handle the situation, which meant he couldn't adapt. Suddenly, the man's daughter opened the door. A mysterious assassin tried to stab the little girl, but Roland quickly jumped in and took the blow. Before Roland struck back at the assassin, that's how he got the scar on his stomach. Layla patted his head comfortingly as he explained that his boss had scolded him while treating his wound. He was just an inexperienced kid back then, even though he had memorized everything. But reality was a completely different matter. He knew that just a minute before, he had been on the verge of success. But he had failed and felt guilty. After finding out about the daughter of the man he had assassinated, Layla vaguely remembered Milia mentioning that she had recently met a female adventurer. She asked him if that was the girl. Roland agreed and said that he was atoning for his sins. But Layla told him he shouldn't have to bear the sins of others. Roland admitted that he would have forgotten about it if he were still an assassin. But now he wanted to try and help the girl. Layla told him that he should do just that. She was still surprised that he had been stabbed when he was so young. He said that his master took him in on his 5th birthday, and his 3rd assassination was 6 years after that. After that day, I was never stabbed from the front again. Layla told him he could share his stories with her. She would always be there with him. This made Roland smile, and he kissed her. This made Layla happy. The next day, Sasha came to the guild to see Roland and wanted to accept a quest from him. But Milia deliberately lied, saying that Roland was busy. Roland was confused. He wondered why Milia would lie. The argument between Milia and Sasha quickly drew everyone's attention. Roland just saw it as a professional matter and said it was normal for adventurers, and that he was the staff member they trusted the most. The others agreed with this. If only it weren't for Roland's lack of empathy. The others explained that there were no other adventurers available, and that this situation was a sign from the gods. They told him to just go with the flow, even if he believed there was a more efficient way. The two girls continued to argue, until Sasha admitted that she only came here to see Roland, but Milia still refused. The argument continued while the others looked on with bewildered faces, until Morley intervened, but they just told him to shut up and get lost. This offended him, and he started yelling at Sasha for calling him old and tried to give her some weird advice about not getting too obsessed with the person you're interested in. Otherwise, they'll end up meeting muscular dads or rivals, things he's experienced himself. One of the staff members was confused until another explained that Morley follows women who are interested in roughhousing, and he tries to beat them until they get so scared that they move away. For some reason, he started crying, and Sasha and Milia didn't know what to do. Roland decided to take over as Morley was being led away. As Roland asked Sasha what he could help her with, she apologized for bothering him and said she wanted to speak with him privately. So he decided to take her outside. When she told him that she'd been thinking about everything, she revealed that she was going to leave the city and didn't want to be a bother to him anymore. But he didn't seem to care. Sasha knew there were many other women trying to get his attention. Sasha said she didn't think she would ever see him again. But she was glad that he had saved her when she was a little girl. However, after thinking about her past and what was happening now, she finally understood that the girl from the mansion no longer existed. She was just an adventurer, and he was just a guild employee. The man who saved her that night was gone too. She felt she had to say goodbye so she wouldn't be lost in her past any longer. Roland asked her if she had any plans, which made her joke about his sudden concern. She said that anything could happen since she was an adventurer now. She thanked Roland one last time and shook his hand goodbye, before leaving the guild. Iris was standing behind a tree, eavesdropping, when Roland appeared, apologizing and saying that Milia had set him up to it. Iris reminded him that he shouldn't mix his work and personal life, which surprised Roland. But he just replied that someone else needed to hear that more than he did. Another day, while working at the guild, Roland received a letter from headquarters and was about to read it when someone called out at the counter. He walked over and reminded them that it was his lunch break, which made the girl look disappointed. He realized it was Carolina Besley, who had applied to be an adventurer but hadn't been tested yet. Roland recalled the information on her application form and said that he would be her examiner right now. The girl suggested he call her Lena, but Roland continued to use her full name and proceeded with the examination. When it came to measuring her magical power, Carolina refused, saying she didn't want to take on combat missions. Roland explained that even when on collection quests, adventurers still needed to be ready to fight in an emergency, which made her reluctantly agree. He wondered what to do with her. They were supposed to do a practical test in the nearby square, But she wanted to skip that too. Roland told her she would fail if she didn't do it, but Carolina didn't believe that. Insisting her poison resistance skill would help her, Roland then asked why she wanted to become an adventurer. She admitted she just wanted to become an herbalist, which made him realize that becoming an adventurer was just the first step for her. And so she had agreed to it. Because many others had become adventurers through the guild. If she failed, she would just go to another guild because she believed she could really help people. From her application, Roland knew she claimed to have poison resistance that reduced its effectiveness by 10%. And he thought for a moment, before saying that it was a wonderful skill. This made her blush and stare at him in shock. It was the first time anyone had ever said that to her. After asking a few questions, Roland decided he would let her pass the test on one condition. She had to accept quests near the Elenfatine swamp region, a place with a hot, humid climate where toxins that cause dizziness often appear. She was thrilled to finally find a suitable place. For her poison resistance ability, she thanked Roland, saying this was the 6th time she'd asked and she felt so guilty about it that she was starting to lose hope. After Carolina left, Roland encountered another adventurer, named Gil, who seemed worried. Gil accused Roland of seducing Marissa, his childhood friend, because she had been taking on more quests to impress Roland. Roland was confused until the man was interrupted by Neil and his companion, who threatened the man for saying such things to Roland. But Roland told them that threatening people wasn't allowed. The two apologized to Roland before being told to apologize to the man. As both Roland and the man apologized to each other, Roland returned to the topic with the man whose name was Gil. Gil explained that Marissa was his childhood friend, and she was taking on more quests than usual, because she felt the receptionist was great and would praise her for working hard or scold her when she made a mistake. Roland wanted to be that kind of receptionist, until Gil explained that Marissa was talking about him. And he asked Roland to stop giving Marissa quests. Roland realized that Gil was jealous, and suggested that Gil confess his feelings to Marissa if he wanted Roland to stop giving her quests. Gil was taken aback, but eventually accepted the suggestion. Amelia wondered what would happen, getting excited as she considered herself the love police. The next day, Gil returned with Marissa and announced that they had become a couple, thanking Roland for his help. Marissa whispered to Roland, asking him to keep it a secret that she had consulted with him. Meanwhile, Nell and his companion still didn't understand concepts like childhood friend or lover and started crying, begging Roland to teach them how to be popular, making him the reluctant love expert for a short time.